For a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Thursday, the 11th of April.
Cabinet revolt. Rishi Sunak will face a rebellion if he decides to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. The Chancellor, the Home Secretary and the Justice Secretary have all voiced opposition to leaving.
This comes as shocking stats show that more than half the foreign aid budget is now being spent within Britain, looking after asylum seekers.
And in better news, for the Prime Minister perhaps, NHS waiting lists have fallen for a 5th month in a row. Rishi Sunak claims strike action has hindered progress, but insists he's still making headway. But despite the fall, lists are still longer than when Sunak took office. Now, Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting will speak to us on GB News this very hour.
Now, it's such a big day to be speaking to the Shadow Health Secretary. Not only, of course, we've got these new numbers showing that the waiting lists have now fallen for 5 months in a row, but also, of course, the CAS review came out yesterday, and the Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, has been changing his position on some of these issues. We want to know, what would you ask Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary, one of the top people in Keir Starmer's team? We'll be speaking to him a little bit later this hour.
Yes, he's changed his tune, hasn't he? Trans women are women, he used to say. Now he says things are a little bit more complex and has accepted the recommendations of the CAS review. But I also want to know, he talks a lot about using the private sector in the NHS. He talks about reforms and shaking things up. How would he deal with the BMA, the trade union, who are leading the charge in all of these strikes we're seeing? I'm not sure whether Wes Streeting will be able to handle them.
You think there might be more strikes?
I think
it's a bit
potentially
abrasive.
could be. Potentially could be.
I think that's a really, really strong argument, because Rishi Sunak says that waiting lists would be 400,000 lower than they are today if it weren't for all of these strikes. And if Wes Streeting wants to come in and reform the NHS, use more private sector involvement, all of this stuff, are the left-wing BMA, the trade union of the doctors, particularly the junior doctors,
He's already riled them
radical
up.
Political people,
He's
are
already
they going to just take that lying down?
I don't think so. I don't think so. But hopefully we'll be able to put that to the man himself later on in the show. So please do send us your questions for the Shadow Health Secretary. He could be the man running the NHS in the not-so-far future. Let us know, gbnews.com/your-say. Should we get the headlines?
Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 12. I'm Sophia Wansler in the GB newsroom. Your top story this hour, the Prime Minister says the plan is working as new NHS figures show hospital waiting lists in England have fallen for the 5th month in a row. Over 305,000 people have been waiting more than a year to start routine hospital treatment at the end of February. That's down from 321,000 at the end of January. The government and NHS England have pledged to eliminate all waiting lists of more than a year by March next year. Rishi Sunak said there's more to be done, though.
Well, when I became Prime Minister, I said that cutting waiting lists was one of my 5 priorities. And whilst we haven't made as much progress as I would have liked, today's figures show that we are making headway towards that goal. Over the last 5 months, a reduction of around 200,000 in the overall waiting lists, which is positive. And if it wasn't for industrial action, an extra 430,000 patients would have been treated. So whilst there's, of course, a lot more work to do, the plan is working.
Meanwhile, nearly half of workers have spent time looking at jobs outside the NHS, according to new analysis. Researchers have found around 47% have looked at employment outside the NHS, with 14% applying for non-NHS jobs between March and June last year. It's understood stress, workload, staff shortages and pay are the top reasons for staff leaving the NHS. In other news, a man has been remanded in custody after being charged with murdering a woman who was stabbed to death in the city as she walked her baby in a pram. 25-year-old Habibur Massam stood in a glass-fronted dock as he was told by District Judge Alex Boyd he will appear again at Bradford Crown Court on Friday. Dressed in a grey sweatshirt and flanked by 3 security guards, he spoke only to confirm his name, date of birth and address during the 6-minute-long hearing. 27-year-old consumer actor died after being stabbed in Bradford on Saturday afternoon. A change in family visa rules comes into force today as part of the government's plan to reduce immigration. It's part of the Home Secretary's promise to transform the UK's immigration system, cut unfair levels of migration and ensure those arriving here do not burden the taxpayer. The measure will see the minimum income for family visas rise by more than £10,000 to £29,000, an increase of more than 55%. By early 2025, this will have increased 2 more times, rising to £38,700. The Royal Mail says it's working to remove counterfeit stamps from circulation after reports of fake ones. It follows calls from GBNews for Royal Mail to investigate its systems after an investigation. The Telegraph reported China is flooding Britain with counterfeit Royal Mail stamps as small retailers are buying forgeries online. It's understood that the fakes were causing a rise in complaints that stamps bought from legitimate stores were being deemed fraudulent, which can result in a £5 penalty. A new poll suggests Rishi Sunak and other high-profile Tories could keep their seats because of voter ID confusion in the next general election. A poll by campaign group Best for Britain found 16% of people did not know that they would need photo ID to vote in the upcoming local and general elections. It means around 5 million people could be turned away from polling stations. The government passed the legislation in 2022, with the new rules coming into force last year. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson has attacked Rishi Sunak's flagship smoking policy as absolutely nuts as he criticised the state of the Conservative Party at an event in Canada. The Prime Minister's plan would prevent anyone who is turning 15 this year or younger from ever being able to legally buy tobacco products.
Some of the things that we're doing now, I think, that are being done in the name of conservatism, I think they're absolutely nuts. But, you know, we're banning cigars. And what is... I mean, maybe you all think that's a great idea. I just can't see what is the point of banning... Well, the party of Winston Churchill wants to ban... I mean, donnez-moi un break, as they say in Quebec. You know, it's just mad.
And a once-a-day migraine pill has been recommended on the NHS, with a charity claiming it could change the lives of thousands. The pill, sold under the brand name Equipta, has been given a green light for NHS use under new final draft guidance. Anyone who experiences at least 4 migraines a day and a month, has tried at least 3 other methods but found no relief, will be eligible. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 8 minutes past 12. Now, Rishi Sunak will reportedly face a revolt from his cabinet if he decides to pull the United Kingdom out of the European Convention on Human Rights. At least 12 cabinet ministers are understood to oppose such a move.
Well, these include big names like the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, the Justice Secretary Alex Chalk and the Home Secretary James Cleverly.
Meanwhile, new figures from the Foreign Office reveal that more than a quarter of Britain's foreign aid budget was spent housing refugees and asylum seekers across the country last year, as the total cost of accommodating them rose by £600 million.
Well, let's cross to Westminster and speak to GBNews political correspondent Olivia Utley on this. The Cabinet extremely divided over the issue of the European Convention on Human Rights. Do you get the impression that Rishi Sunak is actually genuinely moving in that direction?
I think Rishi Sunak might be moving in that direction. Obviously, up until now, government policy has been very much that Britain will stay in the European Court of Human Rights. But Rishi Sunak has been very frustrated recently with the court because he sees this as essentially the final stumbling block, which is stopping the Rwanda plan from actually being implemented. Then, of course, yesterday we got that Swiss ruling. There's 8 elderly Swiss women who went to the European Court of Human Rights and claimed that they needed compensation. They believed that their government hadn't worked hard enough to stop climate change, and they were unable to live their lives as they would want to as a result. The ECHR upheld that ruling, which essentially paves the way for climate activists in the UK to sue the British government for not meeting, for example, the net zero target. Now, that is a thorn in the government side too. And when that happened, Claire Coutinho, the Energy Secretary here, and a very close friend of Rishi Sunak's, a really strong ally of his, came out and said that it was concerning. Now, I read that as perhaps Claire Coutinho sort of putting out some feelers on behalf of Rishi Sunak to test the mood in the Conservative Party, to see if there was an appetite for potentially pushing leaving the ECHR on the Conservative manifesto. Of course, if Rishi Sunak did do that, he would get a lot of plaudits from his tend to be right of the Conservative Party backbenchers, but he would face a revolt within his cabinet. It's thought that by 2 to 1, cabinet ministers would like to stay in the ECHR. Would Rishi Sunak take a risk like that? Would he annoy the people closest to them, his inner circle, that much to roll the dice on leaving the ECHR? Conservative voters in the country might be quite pleased if he did. 50-50 they are now, split on whether or not to leave the ECHR. So it's going to be a huge decision for Rishi Sunak, and I think a lot will depend on what happens next week with the Rwanda bill.
I imagine Conservative Party members are even more staunchly for leaving the ECHR.
Yes, and yet the problem here with all of this discussion is there's no legislative time to withdraw from the ECHR before the election, even if the election is the latest date it could possibly be. This stuff isn't going to happen in a matter of months. It's a hugely complicated task, which would mean even if he's saying that he would absolutely gung-ho leave the ECHR, it wouldn't happen because he's not going to win the election.
Manifesto?
I suppose, Olivia, does that mean that it's almost like a sort of a free gimmick in the manifesto, potentially?
Potentially it is. I mean, I've spoken to people around the Conservative Party, people close to the Conservative Party, who think that Rishi Sunak might end up writing a really pretty bold Conservative manifesto, because it does look quite unlikely at this point that the Conservative Party is going to win. I think it all depends on what happens both with the Rwanda bill next week and also with those all-important local elections at the start of May. If Rishi Sunak gets the sort of hammering that most people are now expecting, he might feel that it's time to sort of throw caution to the wind and start talking about very bold policies which could alienate some people but could bring some of those red wall Brexiteers back on board with the Conservative Party. It would be a sort of final throw of the dice. Remains to be seen whether he has the sort of gumption, if that's what it is, to do something like that.
Yes, and Olivia, something else that's appeared in the news headlines today, which is quite interesting, I suppose is one word for it. Over half of our foreign aid budget is now going towards housing and accommodating asylum seekers and refugees within Britain. So it's over half is being used domestically.
Which is fascinating. I mean, you could say that that's a sort of clever workaround that the UK government has done because, you know, there are plenty in the Conservative Party who don't like the fact that Britain contributes 0.7% of GDP to foreign aid. But, you know, there is an argument that part of the point of that huge aid budget which we have is to give Britain sort of soft power overseas, to show that we are an international force to be reckoned with. If we're spending that money within the UK, do we just lose that soft power element of the foreign aid budget?
And it's a really, really interesting question. I think we should make clear we're writing down on the little words at the bottom of the screen more than a quarter spent on housing refugees. That's on refugees specifically, and a half of the entire foreign aid budget, according to The Telegraph, is going on in the United Kingdom. So presumably not just on refugees, but on other projects within the United Kingdom as well. Really serious money now being spent on all of this stuff. But Olivia Utley, thank you very much for talking through those significant issues for the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Olivia. Yes, lots of people would assume that our foreign aid budget would solely go towards humanitarian exercises in humanitarian projects outside of the United Kingdom, in some of the most poor nations in the world. Instead, because of the problems we have with the migration crisis and asylum seekers and the crossings in the Channel, it's being spent here instead.
And yet some people might say, well, I mean, if we're going to spend 0.5%, it's a little bit under that at the moment, but if we're going to have a fixed percentage of GDP that we spend on this stuff, we might as well use that on the refugee situation rather than taking that out of other budgets.
Yes, some people might think money well spent. But we're now joined by Chief Political Commentator at The Independent, John Rentoul. John, thank you very much for joining us on Good Afternoon Britain. Good to see you. Your thoughts on this potential revolt within Cabinet over the ECHR? Do you imagine that Rishi Sunak might actually go through with this?
No, well, as Tom said, there isn't time for legislation before the election. This is all about what might go into the manifesto, and it's all about actually. I mean, before we get to the manifesto, it's all about getting flights off to Rwanda before the election. And I think what Rishi Sunak said the other day, that he wouldn't allow a foreign court to stop the flights taking off. I think that was aimed at putting pressure on the European Court of Human Rights not to interfere if the flights actually do start to go ahead.
And what is the big issue here with regard to the battle within Cabinet? After all, I don't think a single person in Cabinet, if you really peered into their soul, genuinely believes they're going to win the next general election. They might as well chuck it in the manifesto, mightn't they?
Why not?
Well, well, no, I mean, I think the problem with that is that you end up in the situation that John Major found himself in 1997, where he had to plead with his own MPs not to put opposition to the single currency in their personal manifestos. Because, I mean, it would just divide the Tory party down the middle. I mean, it's not just the cabinet. I mean, if you look at the parliamentary party, the One Nation group claims 100 Tory members. They're absolutely opposed to putting something like that in the manifesto, a commitment to leave the ECHR. So I think that would divide the Tory party deeply on the eve of an election campaign.
John, I wonder if the mood music is changing a little with regards to the ECHR among the general public. I imagine that perhaps readers of The Independent and those working at your fine publication might scoff at the idea of leaving the ECHR. They might think it's a far-right idea or something that only headbangers think. But then if you look at this ruling that we saw earlier on in the week, with this relating to climate change and the Swiss elderly women, I think a lot of people are starting to realise that perhaps it is acting in a political way and that it is infringing on national sovereignty in a negative way, and that perhaps actually it's legitimate to question whether we need to be a member.
Yeah, no, I think that ruling really did not help the ECHR's case, because actually in recent months, there's been evidence that the ECHR has been more political in the opposite direction because it's rewritten its rules about injunctions. What stopped the Rwanda flight in the first place 2 years ago was an injunction from the ECHR. Now, the ECHR has rewritten its rules so that it would only issue such injunctions in a much more limited set of circumstances in future. And I thought that was a response to British pressure, because, I mean, it is in the end, it is a political court, and it is subject to political pressures. I mean, there was a compromise reached, for example, on the issue of prisoners' votes. But you're quite right. This climate change ruling does suggest that it emphasises that the court is political, and would undermine support for our membership of it, even though I suspect most readers of The Independent are strongly supportive of stronger action on climate change.
And there is a strong argument from those that oppose leaving the ECHR that this is just an incredibly complicated thing to do. Almost every treaty that the United Kingdom has signed up to in the last 50, 60 years has been referencing this court, not least the Good Friday Agreement, the Belfast Agreement that brought peace in Northern Ireland. Are we going to go through another 5 years of negotiations over Northern Ireland in order to extract ourselves from another European institution? I think a lot of people might just feel, my goodness, that will make us all very tired.
Yeah, but I do think that's a boring and mistaken argument, Tom. I mean, the point is, it's a question of principle. I mean, do we believe in the European Court of Human Rights in principle or not? And I would have said issues such as the Good Friday Agreement are secondary to that. I mean, it's a bit like saying, Brexit was a terrible idea because you'd have to negotiate and renegotiate a lot of treaties, which we did. But the point about Brexit was, as a matter of principle, did we want to be a member of this international institution or not? And the same applies to the ECHR.
Spot on, matter of principle.
Yeah, matter of principle, but it will be one of the biggest arguments, because everyone will remember the Brexit years and think, we've just done that.
Can we go through that again? Can we go through that again?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, John Rentoul. Very good to speak to you, political commentator at The Independent. Chief political commentator, I should say. Interesting. Yeah, interesting.
Big questions, and perhaps a foresight there of some of the conversations that we'll be seeing in the run-up to the election. What could be in the Tory manifesto? Frankly, what do you want to go in that manifesto? And if it does go in there, will it matter? gbnews.com/your say. Well, coming up, NHS waiting lists. They've dropped now for the 5th month in a row, but compared to last year, the same time last year, they're up on 12 months, down on 5 months. Who do you want to choose? Well, Rishi Sunak says his plan is working. We're going to speak to the Shadow Health Secretary a little bit later on. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Cheryl Baker. Good morning, Cheryl.
Good morning.
When you think back to 1981, I mean, obviously the ABBA victory then wasn't all that long ago, 9 years earlier. Do you think they had a huge influence then on the sort of direction that Eurovision was taking?
Yeah, they did. They changed it completely. Because up to then, it had all been very staid and a bit posh, long frock, sticky bow ties, and then they came along and they blew it out of the water. They looked so different, and they modernised it. And I think, it made a big change. After that.
And we were watching your performance on Eurovision a little bit earlier on of making your mind up. I mean, you had so much fun, didn't you, up on that stage? Were you, in some part, inspired by ABBA?
Yes, I would say so. ABBA was 74. I turned professional in 75 and did my first song for Europe, which was, when they choose the British song to go forward. I did my first one in February 1976. So, it was only months after ABBA's performance that I started my own Eurovision journey. They just changed the face of it. They changed the face of Eurovision. And if you look at what Eurovision is now, I think that all started with ABBA's performance. It made people think this is much more than just a song contest. It's all about the look. I mean, the clothes, they looked fantastic. And even the composer, or not the composer, what's he called? The conductor. He was dressed as Napoleon. It made it fun. Fantastic song, obviously, brilliant singing, but the whole look of it just changed the way that Eurovision is, and to this day.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. It's a much drier and brighter day for many areas of the UK today. It'll also feel quite warm in the sunshine, but if you're across the south coast, you're more likely to see cloudier skies and potentially some rain. That's because of this weather front that sunk southwards through tonight. It's going to linger for southern areas through the day. Much of the rain has pitted away from it, but if you're in southwestern areas, especially across parts of Cornwall, you're more likely to see some drizzly rain through much of the day. Clouds will be a little bit thicker as well, extending to more southeastern areas too. Elsewhere though, it should be a dry and bright day. It's going to feel warm in the sunshine, particularly across the east coast. We could see 20 degrees in parts of Cambridgeshire, for example, but temperatures climbing to the high teens quite widely. Through this evening, rain will return for northwestern areas, pushing into parts of Northern Ireland and then western Scotland. Elsewhere, though, it should stay largely dry, but clouds will thicken through the night. So it's going to be a bit of a dull evening and a dull start to the day, but it's going to be another mild start. Temperatures won't dip much below 10 degrees once again. In the far north of Scotland, you're likely to see a fairly bright start, but elsewhere, as I said, it's likely to be quite cloudy, with rain persisting across this northwestern patch through much of the day. Further south, for central areas of England, parts of Wales, the south coast too, some sunshine will break out, particularly as we head into the afternoon. It may be a little hazy, but it's going to feel warm in that sunshine once again, with temperatures likely climbing to above 20 degrees, which could make it the warmest day of the year so far.
Hello, it's 12:25. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. Now, the NHS has had a little bit of welcome news today, as its waiting lists have fallen for the 5th month in a row.
Of course, cutting NHS waiting lists was Rishi Sunak's one of his top 5 priorities. And he said that the statistics clearly show now that the government is making headway. However, of course, Sunak's facing criticism from his predecessor, Boris Johnson, describing some of the Prime Minister's policies as absolutely nuts. And whilst these numbers have fallen 5 months in a row, compared to the same time last year, these numbers are up.
There's a little bit of spin.
It depends. If you're a politician in favour of the government, you could say, look, 5 months of fools. But if you're a politician against the government, just go back a few further months and it looks like it's increased. I mean, well, statistics, lies, damned lies, and statistics.
Yes, the trajectory is going down. But yes, not for that long. GB News political editor Christopher Hope joins us now. Christopher, Rishi Sunak will want to present this as a big win, is it?
Yeah, well, as Tom says, it's a trend in the right direction. It's 5 months falling, 7.54 million people waiting for treatments, down 7.58 million in February. That's the March stat. But these figures, they do mask people in real pain. People are in pain, in agony, waiting for their treatment. I mean, for every single digit on that number is a voter in pain. It's a lot of people and a lot of worry for them. So although it's good news in a sense for his political prospects, maybe, millions of people are still waiting for treatment on a service they pay for through their taxes, and that is a failure by this government. But it is getting better for them. I mean, as Labour is saying, of course, Wes Streeting, we'll talk to you later for your programme. They're saying that waiting lists are still 320,000 longer than they were when he became Prime Minister. These are far too long, however way you cut it, but they're moving in the right direction, which is why Rishi Sunak is quite pleased today.
And Chris, you're going to be speaking to the Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, a little bit later in this programme. We've had people writing in with some questions that they want asked. And one of the questions that keeps coming up, in fact, Simon has said it on gbnews.com/your say just a few moments ago. Wes Streeting keeps saying that he's a big, bold reformer, that he wants to use more private sector involvement in the NHS, that he's going to take on the sort of middle-class lefties who are squeamish about that. What Simon wants to know is how on earth is he going to do that without resistance from the unions that run the employment within the NHS? How on earth is he going to do that without more BMA strikes?
Well, we'll ask that question of Wes Streeting for Simon. But for me, what Wes would say, I think, where he asked that question, is that he would like to bring in more private healthcare. He's made clear to me when I worked for a different media outlet that he would be happy to bring in more. If he got this list cleared, he would pay for them through the private sector. He says things, I think, Wes Streeting, which many of the unions wouldn't like, but he's willing to put himself on the side of the patients. I think that's why he's got a chance here for trying to bring that down. But there's no question. I mean, I think Wes Streeting is someone who I think, unlike probably most other, I think he can do reforms to the NHS, which the Tories would find quite hard to do. I think I've often thought that the Labour is the party which can reform the NHS because they get the permission to do so, whereas for the Tory party, they are not trusted by many, often unfairly, on dealing with the NHS.
Yes, although it may be that the Labour Party can reform the NHS, but I think in some ways it may well be more likely that Wes Streeting will have difficulties because they need to have a closer relationship with the unions, fighting back against the unions. Lots of people within the Labour Party will say absolutely no to any even sniff of privatisation, won't they?
And of course, Wes Streeting's been criticising those that have been opposed. What was the phrase he used? Middle-class lefties? That's the BMA.
Exactly.
I know. Well, and I think Wes Streeting will know that the proportion of operations and work by the NHS done privately increased the most under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown's government, not under the Tory government, and that's often forgotten.
Yes, that's very true indeed. Well, we're going to stay tuned for that interview. Very interested to hear what Wes Streeting has to say. And also on the issue of trans women are women. He's changed his tune on this, accepting the review's recommendations, or at least accepting what the review says yesterday. There's been quite a lot of infighting on this issue, so it would be interesting to ask him on that as well.
To hear from the horse's mouth. But before all of that, we're going to have a little look at the news headlines. So see you after that.
It's 12:30. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your headlines. The Prime Minister says the plan is working as new NHS figures show hospital waiting lists in England have fallen for the 5th month in a row. Over 305,000 people have been waiting more than a year to start routine treatment ending of February. That's down from 321,000 at the end of January. The government and NHS England have pledged to eliminate all waiting lists of more than a year by March next year. A man has been remanded in custody after being charged with murdering a woman who was stabbed to death in the city as she walked her baby in a pram. 25-year-old Habibur Massam stood in the glass-fronted dock as he was told by District Judge Alex Boyd that he will appear again at Bradford Crown Court on Friday. 27-year-old Kulsuma Akhtar died after being stabbed in Bradford on Saturday afternoon. A change to family visa rules comes into force today as part of the government's plan to reduce immigration. It's part of the Home Secretary's promise to transform the UK's immigration system, cut unfair levels of migration and ensure those arriving here do not burden the taxpayer. The measure will see the minimum income for family visas rise by more than £10,000 to £29,000, an increase of more than 55%. And a new poll suggests Rishi Sunak and other high-profile Tories could keep their seats because of voter ID confusion in the next general election. A poll by campaign group Best for Britain found 16% of people did not know that they would need a photo ID to vote in the upcoming local and general elections. The government passed the legislation in 2022, with the new rules coming into force last year. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
The latest GB News travel.
The A74M is closed southbound to accident investigation works between junctions 14 through to junction 15. Traffic is coping well. On the clockwise side of the M25, very slow traffic to an earlier broken down vehicle from 24 for Potters Bar to Enfield at 25. Westbound on the M4, a lane closure and heavy traffic to Shed Load at Maidenhead junction 8 through to Bracknell at junction 10. Also on the westbound side of the M4, a lane closure to a broken down lorry just before junction 15 for Swindon East. Traffic is coping well there at the moment. It is, however, looking slow for the northbound side of the M5, a lane closure whilst a vehicle has a tyre changed between junctions 22 for Burnham-on-Sea to Weston-super-Mare at junction 21. And that's your very latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
I'm delighted to welcome Andrew Doyle, who was behind that comedy event in Edinburgh last night. Andrew, great stuff. Look, what's the mood like on the ground in Scotland?
Well, I mean, certainly at last night's event at Comedy Unleashed in Edinburgh, there was a sense of relief that we're all gathering and we're all laughing at this stuff. We're just laughing at the way that the police have approached this, the way the SNP have approached it. Various people from various of the protected characteristics that you must not mock or offend. We're mocking each other. It was just a reminder that actually these are just jokes. We're just having a laugh. We're just exercising our creative freedom and our freedom of speech. The mood, I think, is generally one of disbelief that Humza Yousaf and the SNP have pushed through this crazy authoritarian draconian law, irrespective of all the criticisms that have come from senior members of the police, members of the judiciary, members of the public, the QCs, various bodies have all said this is not workable because the police have said that they will investigate absolutely every complaint. And although they've said they won't target comedians, they're going to end up investigating comedians if the complaints come in, because that's what they've pledged to do.
Well, that's it. So conceivably, and this is how ridiculous and unenforceable it is, if someone had reported you last night in that audience, the police would have had to have investigated you, wouldn't they?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And whether they would have taken it any further will come down to the individual police officer. We had Siobhan Brown from the SNP on the BBC the other day, and she was asked very clearly about this. You know, who makes the decision what to investigate and what not to investigate, how to take it forward? She said it's a matter of individual police judgment. Now, the problem with that, of course, is there are activists within the police force in Scotland. We've caught them at it before. Now, the fact that they're not going to pursue J.K. Rowling after she challenged them is partly probably just cowardice, because she's got a lot of power and clout behind her. But if it was a complaint about us, a bunch of comedians in a small room in Edinburgh, they might well have taken it further.
It is 12:36. You're watching, listening to Good Afternoon Britain. Now, Joe Biden, the President of the United States, has vowed ironclad support for Israel amid growing concerns that Iran is preparing what's been described as a significant attack.
Could this be the beginning of wider escalation? Could this be the start of World War III? Well, the president's comments come after Iran's supreme leader repeated a threat to launch a retaliatory strike against Israel over a bombing in Damascus that, of course, killed several members of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps.
Well, let's go live to Tel Aviv now and speak to the foreign editor of Jewish News, Yotam Confino. Yotam, how seriously is this threat being taken?
I would say very seriously. Israel has been on the edge for well over a week now after it allegedly killed the top Iranian commander in Damascus. And not only is Israel on a high alert in the northern part of Israel, but basically all over the country, because it is expecting some sort of an Iranian retaliation. Israel doesn't know, obviously, what's going to happen, but it's preparing for an actual attack from Iran. And this could be basically all over Israel. It could be in the north, in the south, or in the center. And that's why the Israeli army has begun disrupting GPS all over the country. So right now, if I'm going on Google Maps, for example, it will show that I'm in Beirut, in Lebanon. I'm not in Tel Aviv. So it's trying to confuse any drones or missiles that might be targeting Israel. So yeah, it's a very serious situation, and that's why we hear constantly Israel warning Iran not to attack. Yesterday, I was at a briefing with the defense minister, and he said that Israel is ready to attack whoever attacked Israel. So if Iran launches an attack, Israel will attack Iran, not any of its proxies, but Iran directly.
And that is what the world should perhaps be most concerned about, the idea that this will turn from a local conflict that has been mainly contained within the Gaza Strip to something where a state is attacking a state, and these are rich, powerful countries with large artilleries. Of course, Iran, up until now, has been operating through proxies and has had its proxies in Yemen, its proxies in Syria as well, and Lebanon sort of work for it. This would be a very, very different issue were this state to be involved. It's an incredibly wealthy nation.
Yeah. First of all, I think we can divide the levels of threats that Israel is facing into three. You have Hamas and Islamic Jihad from Gaza and the West Bank, which is it's a massive threat, but it's much lower than, for example, Hezbollah, which is the second biggest threat from Lebanon. Hezbollah has around 130,000 missiles, many of them precision-guided missiles. They can reach all over Israel. And then you have Iran. Iran is a completely different actor. First of all, it's a state, but it also has more than 3,000 ballistic missiles in its arsenal, many of which can reach Israel. Now, ballistic missiles of that caliber could do a lot of damage to Israel. Israel has a very good missile defense system, one of the best in the world, which is technically supposed to be able to shoot down these ballistic missiles. But if Iran floods Israel with ballistic missiles, both from Iran, but also activates the Houthi rebels in Yemen and Hezbollah at the same time, Israel is looking at a catastrophe, and it's very hard to know if Israel can actually fight against this level of attack.
And to what extent is this a retaliation on the part of Iran? They're threatening to launch this attack because they say that Israel struck the Iranian consulate in Syria.
Look, it's always a matter of when does history start. Hamas would also say that, well, the whole conflict didn't start on October the 7th. Iran would also say that they would just say now that this whole escalation starts with Israel assassinating the commander. That's not true. Iran mobilized Hezbollah on October the 8th to start attacking Israel on a daily basis, and they have. Not only Hezbollah, but also militias in Syria and Iraq, and of course the Houthi rebels. So Iran has started this. Iran is behind this huge escalation, and they can say, well, we're just retaliating for an assassination of a commander. But Israel is saying, well, you started attacking us. That's without a doubt. Your proxies have admitted it. We see this every day. Hezbollah has fired more than 3,000 rockets at Israel since October the 8th. The Houthi rebels have fired ballistic missiles in southern Israel. So again, it's a game of when does history start? For Iran, they would like for it to start last week, and Israel is looking at October 8th as the starting point.
Now, from a British perspective, this is incredibly concerning because, of course, if we move from a state performing an operation against a non-state actor to a state attacking a state and missiles being fired from one to another, there then gets the question of what of United States involvement, what of further spillover. What are the Americans saying about this?
So the Americans are saying that the U.S. commitment to Israel's security is ironclad. In other words, the United States will step in. That's the way to interpret this statement from Joe Biden. So he better back his words up with action if that's the case. Otherwise, this will be another red line from the Obama period.
So could you foresee, Yotam, the United States going to war with Iran?
I think it would be hard for them to back down from saying that the commitment to Israel's security is ironclad. Joe Biden might choose not to do it, but he will look extremely foolish. And I'm sure that inside the United States, there'll be many people who would be happy for him not to go into war in the Middle East, but there'll certainly be a lot of people who would criticize him for leaving Israel hanging when they're fighting on 7 different fronts, including from a state actor like Iran. By the way, Rishi Sunak will also have to make a decision. Is he going to watch Israel try to defend itself from basically 7 different fronts? Or will he step in and try to help? It's a big question. I do think the United States will step in. I'm not sure if the UK is willing to also step into this war.
Well, traditionally, when the United States has gone to perform an operation or gone to war, their most steadfast ally in terms of military cooperation and sharing information and even fighting and dying alongside the American troops has been the United Kingdom, at least for the last 30 years. This raises huge questions about what British involvement could be in the future. But of course, I send all of the best wishes from everyone watching, no doubt, towards you. And please do stay safe. It's a very risky time in Israel right now. Yotam Confino, thank you for your time.
That is the last thing that I imagine the British public and the American public alike would want. A conflict, a direct conflict with Iran.
Well, it all hinges now on the Ayatollah. Will he fire these 3,000 ballistic missiles at Israel, or will he see the very real risk that it'll be far more missiles flying his way?
I mean, experts have been warning for how many years about the threat of Iran? Gosh. Well, let us know what you make of that. gbnews.com/your say is the address to get in touch. Could you see the United States going to war with Iran? And would we, the United Kingdom, follow?
But NHS waiting lists closer to home, they're falling. But the Shadow Health Secretary says the Prime Minister has still failed the NHS. We'll be hearing from him after this.
Good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. It's a much drier and brighter day for many areas of the UK today. It'll also feel quite warm in the sunshine, but if you're across the south coast, you're more likely to see cloudier skies and potentially some rain. That's because of this weather front that sunk southwards through tonight. It's going to linger for southern areas through the day. Much of the rain has pitted away from it, but if you're in southwestern areas, especially across parts of Cornwall, you're more likely to see some drizzly rain through much of the day. Clouds will be a little bit thicker as well, extending to more southeastern areas too. Elsewhere though, it should be a dry and bright day. It's going to feel warm in the sunshine, particularly across the east coast. We could see 20 degrees in parts of Cambridgeshire, for example, but temperatures climbing to the high teens quite widely. Through this evening, rain will return for northwestern areas, pushing into parts of Northern Ireland and then western Scotland. Elsewhere, though, it should stay largely dry, but clouds will thicken through the night. So it's going to be a bit of a dull evening and a dull start to the day, but it's going to be another mild start. Temperatures won't dip much below 10 degrees once again. In the far north of Scotland, you're likely to see a fairly bright start, but elsewhere, as I said, it's likely to be quite cloudy, with rain persisting across this northwestern patch through much of the day. Further south, for central areas of England, parts of Wales, the south coast too, some sunshine will break out, particularly as we head into the afternoon. It may be a little hazy, but it's going to feel warm in that sunshine once again, with temperatures likely climbing to above 20 degrees, which could make it the warmest day of the year so far.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 47 minutes past 12. And we've been asking for your views on the NHS, the situation as it stands and how to fix it. Indeed, what to ask the Shadow Health Secretary. Now, Michael has been in touch saying waiting lists. Back in 2013, I had to wait 9 months for surgery on 6 prolapsed discs. And when I got surgery, I was left incompetent. Or does he mean... well, the point is, these waiting lists are a perennial feature of the NHS, although I think it is fair to say they have got worse.
What I'm seeing from some of these views coming in is a level of cynicism. You're not sure that Wes Streeting could do a better job. He's promised this bold reform, he's promised use of the private sector, he's promised that he'll take on the unions and get these reforms through. But will he, when he comes down to it? Dave has asked Wes Streeting how he would solve the doctors' strike, and I want a clear and precise answer. Yes, a lot of the time you get a bit of waffle, don't you, about how we'd be better at it, we'd manage it, we'd have better negotiations. What do those negotiations actually look like? How much money can you put into NHS staff?
Well, let's go straight to Wes Streeting now, who is joined with our political editor, Chris Hope.
Emily and Tom, that's right. Emily and Tom, hello. I'm with Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary. Well, Wes Streeting, it's good news for the Tory party, waiting list falling 5 months in a row.
Well, I don't know why Rishi Sunak's doing a victory lap. Waiting lists are higher than they were when he became Prime Minister. He's promised to cut NHS waiting lists. And you also look at the performance standards on things like A&E, ambulance response times. They are shockingly bad to the extent that people can no longer be certain that whether they dial 999 with suspected heart attack or stroke or walk into A&E, that they're going to be seen on time in the right way. So I think by now, hopefully, people have reached a conclusion that the longer the Conservatives are in power, the longer patients will wait. Labour has a proud record on the NHS, the shortest waiting times and the highest patient satisfaction on record. But even more importantly, when looking to the future, we've got a plan to get our NHS back on its feet, whether that's 2 million more appointments a year to cut waiting lists, fully costed, fully funded through extra evening and weekend working, doubling the number of scanners so that people get diagnosed earlier, treated faster, training up thousands more GPs and cutting through red tape. I mean, I could go on, Chris, and the point is that unless you have that comprehensive plan that looks at the whole system, you're not going to get the NHS out of this terrible mess the Conservatives have put us in. And the longer they're in power, the longer patients will wait.
Well, Wes Streeting, we've been asked our GB News viewers today for their questions for you. There is some cynicism about whether you can do what you're going to say. Simon asked, will you have the political will to take on the unions who might try and frustrate your attempts to use more private care to try and clear these waiting lists?
But I think people can see that I'm prepared to put people's noses out of joint to do the right thing when it comes to patients, getting people seen faster. I've been accused, Chris, as people have seen in recent days and weeks and months actually, of wanting to privatise the NHS, that over my dead body would we privatise the NHS. I think one of the best things about it is that it's a public service and that when you fall ill, you don't have to worry about the bill. But we've got in the private sector spare capacity. Those who can afford it are paying to go private. They are being seen faster. Working class people who can't afford it are being left behind. And so what I'd say to my critics is, you look those people in the eye and you tell them that you're prepared to see them wait longer because of your left-wing principles. I don't think that's right. I'm prepared to take on those arguments and do the right thing by patients because I came into politics to help people from working class backgrounds like mine, to make sure everyone in this country gets a fair crack, and that's what a Labour government will do.
If you could clear that list with using the private sector for all of it, would you?
If you could, I would. I mean, I think it's got to be a balance, and that's why, as well as using spare private sector capacity, I've said, look, over time, we've got to make sure we've got, the capacity in the NHS that the NHS needs, and, take our 2 million extra appointments. What we're doing is taking the approach that we've seen, actually, that hospital right across the road from us here in Westminster, of making sure that you get your waiting list down faster, using those extra capacity in evenings and weekends, paying their staff to do it. But this shouldn't just be happening in hospitals in the middle of London. This should be happening right across the country. And we will fund that by clamping down on tax avoidance because we prioritise doctors, not tax dodgers.
Another question here from Alan. He asked, will you continue to allow A&E to be used as an extension of a doctor's surgery rather than, as its name suggests, accident and emergency?
No, and look, the crazy thing about this is that if someone can get a GP appointment, it costs the NHS about 40 quid. If they walk into A&E, it costs the NHS about £400. So it's worse for patients being stuck in A&E, it's also more expensive for taxpayers. And that's why, as well as training up thousands more GPs, because poor old GPs, there are thousands fewer now than there were in 2015, we're also going to cut through some of the red tape that holds them back. They have about 40 accountability measures, a lot of which distract them from doing what they enjoy doing, patients really value them doing, and all the evidence says we need, which is, you know, what you and I would call the family-doctor relationship and what the NHS jargon calls continuity of care. That means people can see that family doctor, have that relationship and get a GP appointment rather than going through the 8 a.m. scramble, or worse still, ending up in A&E.
David asked to ask you, what is Labour's actual plan to provide the necessary economic growth to fund the NHS?
Well, look, we've got a serious plan to get the economy growing again, whether that's our industrial strategy that will see us support new green jobs, you know, Great British Energy, for example, making sure that this country invests in its energy industry. It has its own sovereign capability, isn't reliant on foreign energy, but also we don't have this absurd situation where European taxpayers own our energy suppliers and British taxpayers don't see a return on that investment. You know, that will create more jobs, give Britain its energy security back and cut bills. And that's just one plank of our economic plan. You take things like life sciences, for example. We've got some of the best doctors in this country and some of the best life sciences, but our NHS and our life sciences sector could work so much better together. That in turn would create jobs, make sure we're delivering cutting-edge medicine in this country and help to get our economy growing again. And I'd also just say on this, as with the NHS, you can judge us on our record. If the economy had grown under this government at the rate that it grew under the last Labour government, there'd be tens of billions of pounds more available to invest in our public services or to put back into people's pockets. But we are paying a heavy price for the Conservatives' low growth, high tax, high inflation, high interest rate economy.
And Wes Streeting, well, I've got to ask you about the CAS review yesterday. You came out in favour of it. You said you support the recommendations. Do you owe an apology to your colleague Rosie Duffield, the Labour MP, who has fought very hard on this space and been vilified by her colleagues?
Well, I've said before that I think the way that Rosie and actually other people have been treated in terms of the abuse they've faced for speaking up is appalling. I've apologised before and I have no hesitation in doing so again. I think one of the things that Dr. Cass throws up in her report, which has been pretty shocking in terms of the failure of these very vulnerable children and young people, is that we have had a toxic political debate in this country where both people who are raising concerns have been shut down and also, you know, we've had trans people who are often at the worst end of the statistics on being victims of hate crime and suffering mental ill health, suicide, self-harm. They have been absolutely appallingly treated too. And I think as political leaders, we owe it to trans people, to campaigners, to conduct this debate in a much more respectful and responsible way. And that's why, even with the general election hurtling towards us, I said to the government, I'm absolutely prepared to work with them on the implementation of the CAS review. And if Labour wins the general election, we're not taking anything for granted, we will implement the CAS review too.
Well, Wes Streeting, thank you for joining us today on GB News. And there you have it, Tom Emily. Wes Streeting making very clear he would use any kind of private care required to clear this waiting list. An apology there for Rosie Duffield. He now backs the CAS review and the reforms there on the trans issue.
Thanks, Chris. Really interesting to hear from Wes Streeting. Lots to digest.
Absolutely.
I hope we have a little bit of time after the break to be able to do so.
Yes,
Lots
and
of
what
things
did
I want
you
to get
make
stuck
of it?
into.
gbnews.com/your say. We're going to get to that. 100% private sector capacity. If he could, he would, in order to clear that backlog. Really interesting stuff. Bold, fighting talk, but will the union...
This is your chance to win our biggest prize of the year so far. First, there's a totally tax-free £10,000 in cash for you to spend this summer. Then, we want to send you on a bespoke 7-night small boat cruise for two worth £10,000. Thanks to Variety Cruises, you'll be able to choose from any of their 2025 Greek adventures and discover Greece like never before. And with flights, meals, drinks and excursions included, all you have to do is relax. We'll also give you these terrific travel treats. updates. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Mark White was saying there, Sue, that he thinks it's getting worse, and you were nodding along to that. You've seen this over decades. Situation is sprawling along the coast, more people, and the danger is ramping up.
Definitely, because the numbers and the money it's run like a military operation. I mean, I've been told that by the National Crime Agency, and I don't need to be told it by them to know it. It is meticulous because there's so much money involved. So they're marshalling migrants here, the gangs, they're controlling the gangs, and there will be a kingpin. You know, in some city far away in Erbil, or even in Paris, or in Brussels, who never goes anywhere near the beaches. It's like a Ponzi scheme, really.
Yeah. With that in mind, there's such vested interest, such money, such demand, a never-ending string of demand of people who want to come here.
People are already on their way, remember?
Yeah.
If we stop them now, they're already leaving. There's people leaving the Sudan now are going to reach the only place they want to get to, the French beaches, to get to the UK. They'll arrive in 2.5 years' time.
And so,
you see, they're on their way.
If it's that organised, that lucrative, that desirable, how on earth do we ever break that chain?
It sounds incredibly harsh, but I think if the EU change politically in the June elections, which I think it probably will,
yes,
I think they will put up, as the Greeks have done, holding camps all over Europe, the coasts of Europe, where people are assessed, just to see who is coming in, which would be a plus, as the Greeks have done, because we have no idea who is coming in.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Thursday, the 11th of April.
Cabinet revolt. Rishi Sunak will face a rebellion if he decides to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. The Chancellor, Home Secretary and even the Justice Secretary have all voiced opposition to leaving. Should we leave the ECHR? We'll be debating this very question shortly.
And this comes as shocking stats show more than half of the foreign aid budget is now being spent within Britain, looking after asylum seekers.
And it's a Brexit success story, as Britain becomes the 4th biggest exporter in the world. We've overtaken France, the Netherlands and Japan. We'll be speaking to our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan.
Woohoo. We just heard from the Shadow Health Secretary with Christopher Hope, our political editor. Very interesting. He said if he could cut the waiting lists using private sector capacity, he would.
100%
Very interesting.
Private sector
You do know what I do? I do wonder where all this private sector capacity is. I'm not sure there is this abundance of private sector capacity that we could just use at the drop of a hat.
Is that why it's safe for Wes Streeting to say, oh, if I could use it to clear the backlog, I would, because it means then he doesn't have to, because he couldn't.
Well, quite. And he did insist that he is up for the fight, that he's happy to put noses out of joint in order to make his reforms happen.
But here's the thing, that's what the Tories tried to do in 2011 and 2012 when Andrew Lansley was the Health Secretary. He put forward the Lansley reforms, and what was it? It was a huge fight with the vested interests within the health service. He ended up losing his job as Health Secretary over that fight. The thing is, if Wes Streeting is really up for the fight, has he really sized up the people, the institutions, the vested interests that will be opposing him.
Yes, well, Mike makes a good point, actually, and this is something that perhaps is true. He says, to solve the continuous problem that is the NHS, surely the best route to competence and value for money would be a continuous cross-party solution. Yes, I do agree with you. The NHS is treated as a political football constantly. One government tries to do reforms. Everyone says it's too difficult. That stops. Then they try another bunch of reforms. Then that stops, and it just gets pushed around. Meanwhile, we're all supposed to praise it.
But this relies upon politicians being honest. This relies on politicians being consistent and cooperative. Three things that I think are sorely lacking within the House of Commons.
So there you go. Do you trust Wes? Do you trust Wes Streeting to sort the NHS out? Let us know. gbnews.com/your say. Let's get your headlines.
Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 1. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your top story this hour. The Prime Minister says the plan is working as new NHS figures show hospital waiting lists in England have fallen for the 5th month in a row. Over 305,000 people have been waiting for more than a year to start routine hospital treatment at the end of February. That's down from 321,000 at the end of January. The government and NHS England have pledged to eliminate all waiting lists of more than a year by March next year. Rishi Sunak said there's more to be done, though.
Well, when I became Prime Minister, I said that cutting waiting lists was one of my 5 priorities. And whilst we haven't made as much progress as I would have liked, today's figures show that we are making headway towards that goal. Over the last 5 months, a reduction of around 200,000 in the overall waiting lists, which is positive. And if it wasn't for industrial action, an extra 430,000 patients would have been treated. So whilst there's, of course, a lot more work to do, the plan is working.
Meanwhile, nearly half of workers have spent time looking at jobs outside the NHS, according to new analysis. Researchers have found around 47% have looked at employment outside the NHS, with 14% applying for non-NHS jobs between March and June last year. It's understood stress, workload, staff shortages and pay are the top reasons for staff leaving the NHS. In other news, a man has been remanded in custody after being charged with murdering a woman who was stabbed to death in the city as she walked her baby in a pram. 25-year-old Habibur Massam stood in a glass-fronted dock as he was told by District Judge Alex Boyd he will appear again at Bradford Crown Court on Friday. Dressed in a grey sweatshirt and flanked by 3 security guards, he spoke only to confirm his name, date of birth and address during the 6-minute-long hearing. 27-year-old Kulsuma Akhtar died after being stabbed in Bradford on Saturday afternoon. A change to family visa rules comes into force today as part of the government's plan to reduce immigration. It's part of the Home Secretary's promise to transform the UK's immigration system, cut unfair levels of migration and ensure those arriving here do not burden the taxpayer. The measure will see the minimum income for family visas rise by more than £10,000 to £29,000. That's an increase of more than 55%. By early 2025, this will have increased 2 times more, rising to £38,700. The Royal Mail says it's working to remove counterfeit stamps from circulation after reports of fake ones. It follows calls from GBNews for Royal Mail to investigate its systems after an investigation. The Telegraph reported China is flooding Britain with counterfeit Royal Mail stamps as small retailers are buying forgeries online. It's understood that the fakes were causing a rise in complaints that stamps bought from legitimate stores were being deemed fraudulent, which can result in a £5 penalty. And a new poll suggests Rishi Sunak and other high-profile Tories could keep their seats because of voter ID confusion in the next general election. A poll by campaign group Best for Britain found 16% of people did not know that they would need a photo ID to vote in the upcoming local and general elections. It means around 5 million could be turned away from polling stations. The government passed the legislation in 2022, with the new rules coming into force last year. And Britain's greatest rower has questioned the decision to award prize money to track and field gold medalists at the Paris Olympics this summer. Sir Steve Redgrave, who won 5 gold medals in 5 consecutive Olympics, says that rewarding the best-paid athletes with a cash prize is the wrong decision for the Games and money should go to poorer sports.
there are certain sports that are more privileged financially than others. But that's the whole thing about the Olympics, is that you're coming along, everyone's on a level platform from that, and you're making this into a two-tier process of being able to afford. Surely you can do something much better than giving those athletes that are probably earning much more than that already to other sports, or of developing your own sport. Let's have a little bit of lateral thinking. This is for me, is the wrong direction.
And a once-a-day migraine pill has been recommended on the NHS, with the charity claiming it could change the lives of thousands. The pill, sold under the brand name Equicta, has been given the green light for NHS use under new final draft guidance. Anyone who experiences at least 4 migraines a day and has tried at least 3 other methods but found no relief will be eligible. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 8 minutes past 1. Now, Rishi Sunak could face a significant revolt from his own cabinet if he decides to pull the UK out of the European Convention of Human Rights, with at least 12 cabinet ministers understood to oppose such a move.
Is it about 2 to 1? 2 to 1 at the moment?
There's about 30 in the cabinet, so that would make sense.
These include Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, Justice Secretary Alex Chalk and the Home Secretary James Cleverly, so very big names within cabinet vehemently against this.
Well, let's cross to Westminster and speak to GB News political correspondent Olivia Utley. Do you understand this is a live discussion within cabinet right now, or is this just journalists making mischief?
It sounds as though there is some sort of discussion going on, and it does seem plausible that Rishi Sunak might, there's a lot of ifs and mights here, be edging towards potentially putting Britain leaving the ECHR on the Conservative manifesto. Yesterday, Claire Coutinho, the Secretary of State for Energy, said that she was concerned by the ECHR ruling that that essentially paves the way for climate activists in the UK to sue the government for failing to meet net zero targets. She is a close ally of Rishi Sunak's, a close friend of Rishi Sunak's, and it did feel as though she was sort of testing the water to see if there was an appetite, both in the country at large and in the Conservative Parliamentary Party, for Britain leaving the ECHR. I mean, we're certainly not there yet. I don't think we should be expecting Rishi Sunak to be coming out and suggesting that Britain leaves the ECHR anytime soon. And Suella Braverman has said, former Home Secretary, who personally always said that she would like to leave the ECHR, she said that she has spoken to Rishi Sunak on numerous occasions about this, as you would expect, and at no point did she get the indication that he would be prepared to leave the ECHR. So I think that from what I've been seeing, who I've been talking to, it sounds as though there might be kind of the beginnings of discussions behind the scenes, but with such a big chunk of the cabinet absolutely resolutely opposed to leaving the ECHR, including very senior members of the cabinet like Home Secretary James Cleverly, I think Rishi Sunak would have a very tough time trying to whip up the sort of support that he would need for such a radical measure.
And Olivia, we're also hearing that over half of our foreign aid budget is now being spent in Britain on issues including asylum seeker accommodation. Is this in some ways perhaps clever accounting on behalf of the government?
Well, I think that's a very good argument that it is. There are plenty of Conservative MPs and, of course, Conservative voters who don't like the fact that Britain spends 0.7% of its GDP on foreign aid. There are people who say that that money would be better spent at home, particularly in the middle of a cost of living crisis. It now seems as though the government is actually using some of that money to address domestic problems and sort of calling it the foreign aid budget. You could also argue that a big part of the foreign aid budget is to get Britain sort of soft power overseas, that kind of aid for trade slogan that was bandied around a few years ago. The idea that if you if you give aid now to a sort of up and coming countries in Africa, then further down the line they could be a good and loyal trading partner for Britain. You could argue that by spending that foreign aid budget here rather than overseas as it was intended, Britain is losing out on that sort of soft power element of the foreign aid policy.
Now, Olivia, there's something that's very interesting that's happened in the last the last hour or so on social media.
Oh
my
dear,
goodness me,
cough.
Sounds like I need the NHS waiting lists. But Olivia, Nick Fletcher, the Member of Parliament for Don Valley, Conservative MP, he seems to have taken to Twitter today to endorse Lee Anderson, of course, a Member of Parliament for a different party.
Well, exactly. I mean, lots of people in the Conservative Party, I mean, both definitely voters at home, but also MPs, really like Lee Anderson's style. They like that he is a straight-talking man who has been, he was a Labour Party man, his former miner, he's got that sort of backstory to him, and he is prepared to sort of tell voters uncomfortable truths. But I think there are very few Conservative MPs who would actually go as far as to endorse Lee Anderson when he is, of course, now an MP for another party. It'll be really, really interesting to see what Conservative HQ, what Rishi Sunak decides to do about this. Will he discipline Nick Fletcher? He obviously doesn't want to get into a situation where he's stripping Nick Fletcher of the whip. The Tory party has already been sort of decimated in the past couple of years by by-elections and whip removals, most recently, of course, Will Ragg. So it seems unlikely at the moment that Rishi Sunak would go that far. But obviously it is very, very bad for party discipline, and it is not a good reflection of the leader of the Conservative Party. If Conservative Party MPs feel like they have the sort of power and the right to go out and start endorsing candidates from other parties.
It does feel like Conservative MPs feel they can say anything at the moment, and the leadership won't do anything. But thank you very much indeed, Olivia Utley. Shall we speak to GBNews senior political commentator Nigel Nelson to get his view on this breaking news? Nick Fletcher backing Lee Anderson.
Well, a very dangerous thing for Nick Fletcher to do. That one of the rules about being an MP in a particular party is you don't support an MP in another party. So the likelihood is that you would get disciplined at the very least for this. The worst that could happen would be that he would lose the Tory whip.
Do you think that's a serious prospect? Because I suppose the very reason that he's put out this statement backing Lee Anderson is a statement that he says, I think Lee Anderson is the greatest champion for Ashfield, and I hope in Don Valley, where Nick Fletcher is the MP, that Reform voters would back me. He's trying to do a tit for tat, although Lee Anderson hasn't tweeted supporting Nick Fletcher. But clearly this is a breakdown in discipline.
It certainly is. I mean, what he should be saying is, as a Tory MP, is that the best result for Ashfield would be a Conservative Member of Parliament. So he's certainly breaching the rules of his own party by saying things like this. I mean, I think you may be right that discipline is breaking down all over the Conservative Party, and the last thing that Rishi Sunak wants is yet another by-election, which is almost certain to lose. But certainly, if they stick to the rules, Nick Fletcher is in real trouble.
Very odd behaviour, very odd behaviour. We're going to have to leave it there, Nigel, because we're heading to Hartlepool, but good to speak to you. Nigel Nelson is, of course, our senior political commentator. Yeah, no, really, really surprising and perhaps quite significant news there. Yeah. We'll keep an eye on what happens with regard to how the Conservative Party respond to Nick Fletcher. Bit of an odd move. But in other news, today marks the first day of the trial of Moroccan national Ahmed Alid of Hartlepool. Now, he's been charged with murdering Terence Carney in October last year. Now, today, the court heard Ahmed Alid shouted Allah Akbar, meaning God is great, as he stabbed Javad Nouri, his housemate, in the chest. Well, GBNews Yorkshire and Humber reporter Anna Riley is outside Teesside Crown Court for us. Anna, this is a pretty significant development today. Is this being now treated as a potential terror incident?
Good afternoon. That's not what I've heard in court in terms of it being treated as a terrorist incident, but I can outline the facts of the case for you. We heard from the prosecutor that the defendant said he wanted to kill both Mr. Carney, the 70-year-old man that was stabbed to death in the street, and also his housemate, Mr. Nouri, who he's been accused of attempted murder for, due to the conflict in Gaza and to further his desire that Palestine Palestine would be free from the Zionists, by which he meant Israel. And the defendant said he would have killed more people if he had been able to do so. And just to outline the facts of the case, this all happened on the 15th of October 2023 last year. The defendant shared accommodation with Mr. Nouri and also two other housemates. They were being housed by the Home Office. They were all asylum seekers, and at first Mr. Nouri and the defendant got on. He was even complimenting Mr. Nouri for his housekeeping, how well and tidy he kept the house, and then they began falling out when he found out that Mr. Nouri had gone from being a Muslim to a Christian, so transferring from the Islam faith to the Christian faith. He found out that he'd begun to visit the local church in Hartlepool, and the defendant called him an apostate for doing this. The defendant reported this to the police. He said that he felt threatened, and a couple of days later, that's when the attack was launched. It happened in the early hours of the morning on Sunday the 15th of October. Mr. Nouri was asleep in bed when the defendant burst into the room, the prosecution told the jury today, and it was then that he stabbed him multiple times. The prosecution said that Mr. Nouri was a stronger and bigger man, and due to this was able to fight off the defendant. As that was happening, we've heard from a 999 call that the defendant was crying Allahu Akbar during the attack. That was played out in court and heard by the jurors. Now, as the housemate was being tended to and police were on their way, the defendant then left the house and he had started heading towards the centre of Hartlepool, and that's where he tragically happened upon Terence Carney, a 70-year-old man that was out for a walk. The court heard that he regularly went for walks in the morning, and that the defendant came upon him from behind and then stabbed him multiple times. We saw footage of the attack in which Mr. Carney was shouting no, no, no and trying to get away, but he was fatally stabbed and he died of his injuries. Police did try and help him as they were heading to the house where the incident had happened, but were unable to save his life. Then next in the evidence we heard that police took a kitchen knife from the defendant during the arrest, and that he was taken into custody in which he was questioned. And I just want to find you some quotes from what he said in custody. He speaks Arabic, and it was caught on the footage of the police officers who then translated what was said during the arrest. And the defendant began by saying, for the people of Gaza and Allah willing, Gaza would return to be an Arab country. He went on to praise Allah and spoke of him being displeased with those who went astray. He then went on to speak about Palestine and said that the Jews had divided the Arabs. He said that his hands were injured, otherwise he would have continued to do what he referred to as the raid. He spoke of returning with an army of Muhammad, with the non-believers having to pay tax to the Muslims and be humbled. Then further on into the interview, he did say that he described Mr. Carney, the 70-year-old man who died, as an innocent victim, but he said, they killed children and I killed an old man. Then he is also being charged with assaulting two police officers after that interview. This trial continues and it's expected to last about 4 weeks.
Goodness me. Well, Anna Riley, thank you so much for bringing us the facts of the case there. This will be one that we do continue to follow as it develops here on GBNews.
Just the first day of the trial, and all of that information has come out already. Wow, shocking incident. Yes, we will bring you any updates on that, and of course when it comes down to sentencing. Coming up, we are going to be debating a big question of the day. Shall we leave the ECHR? There's apparently a cabinet revolt on the cards if Rishi Sunak were to suggest this, were to decide to do it. The PM, 12 cabinet ministers would say absolutely not. We cannot leave the ECHR, but should he just do it? Should we leave the European Court of Human Rights?
Wes & Co. Weekdays from 6 p.m.
You think this country needs new gas power stations? Apparently, this will all be about trying to get some form of energy security. Rishi Sunak has upset people today with this suggestion, people saying that actually this would do more damage to climate change than it would do good. Where are you on it, Richard?
I'll tell you exactly where. We need a lot more gas power stations and nuclear power stations because quite often the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. Last week, we imported 16% of all our electricity because we haven't got enough capacity in the UK, and we're now totally over-reliant on renewables.
The part of the problem is the lack of storage capacity, which the government has finally got round to addressing. I think this as backup is actually quite a sensible idea. But they are not doing anything, as far as I can tell. At the moment, it will be retrofitted to have storage capability, which seems to be utterly bonkers. I mean, anyone who's got solar panels, you know very well you're storing up energy. So it's about storage as much as production. They could have gone, 20 years ago, we could have had nuclear power. We could have done more. We haven't looked far enough ahead in the future, and we are in grave danger of making the same mistake. I mean, the other side of this is, what is the difference going to be? Blackouts are, they're irritating and... Irritating?
It'd be disastrous. It would destroy our economy.
Well, they would be now, but, some of us remember 3-day weeks and things like that. And in fact, I grew up thinking that everybody had, at least a couple of days a week when they had to eat off a primus stove and things.
This is, again, I don't want to harp on, but this is one of the problems in the politics in our country, isn't it? So many politicians, they just think in election cycles. Absolutely. They just think, what can I do and say to get my own backside re-elected at the next general election? They're not always looking ahead at actually, politics aside, what is genuinely the best thing for this country.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Well, it's 1:25. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. Thank you for joining us. Now, we've been talking about this throughout the show. Pressure is very much mounting on Rishi Sunak to decide whether or not he wants to leave the ECHR.
Now, with reports that he could face a revolt from cabinet ministers if he decided to leave, what would be in the better interest of the British public? Should we stay or should we go?
Simple question. Joining us to debate this is broadcaster and journalist Nina Mishkov, who believes we should remain firmly within the ECHR. And on the other side, we have former Chief Immigration Officer at the UK Border Force, Kevin Saunders, who believes we couldn't leave soon enough. OK, Kevin, make the case for leaving.
Good afternoon. Right, we should leave the ECHR tomorrow. It is a complete and utter nonsense. We only saw, I think it was last week or the week before, a gentleman, I think he was from Bulgaria, but I could be wrong, who was not the sort of person that we want in the UK. He was a really bad lad, and we wanted to remove him, and he claimed under the ECHR, and of course what happens, he won, and we're stuck with him. We need to come out of this ridiculous piece of legislation. It doesn't work for what we want.
So, Kevin, this is about the deportation of foreign criminals.
It was a foreign criminal, yes. He claimed on the basis that if he was removed, it would infringe his right to family life. Well, it wouldn't infringe his right to family life because he could take his family with him. He doesn't have to remain in the UK. But, of course, that's not how the other side view it. and I'm sure Nina is going to rip me to pieces.
Go on then, Nina.
Well, first of all, Kevin, and hi to Emily and Tom. The European Convention on Human Rights was set up in 1951, and one of the founding members was Sir Winston Churchill, who I think we all agree is, whatever people say, is still a hero to all of us. And the basic principles were to protect the rights of individuals, to protect human rights and freedoms. And so far, on the as far as the ECHR, which is nothing to, it's actually not the EU. It's wider than that. There are more countries that are in the EU. It's not an EU thing. It's a European thing, which is different. And the only two countries that have left the ECHR, one is Greece, when it was taken over by a military junta by the colonels and became a dictatorship, and the other one, the other country that's out, is Russia, who were thrown out when Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. Now, do we want to ally ourselves with Vladimir Putin and the Russian regime, and become pariahs on the world stage? For centuries, Britain has, we travelled the world bringing democracy, bringing the things that Britain is well known for, decency, fairness, democracy around the world. And are we now to turn our back on all of that?
Well, Kevin, why don't you answer that one? We've got countries like Switzerland, countries like Turkey, not in the EU, in the ECHR. They seem relatively independent.
We have, as Nina says, 1951 was when we looked at how we were going to run the world after World War II. Excuse me. Now, that was so long ago that things have changed. So what we need is to look at what's happening today. We never thought we were going to have the situations happening, let's say, just in Europe, what's happening today. So we need to be able to control our own borders. We need to control who we want in the UK and who we don't want in the UK.
Yes, but Kevin, we can do that without the ECA. We can do that if we treat the problem properly, and we can do it. And I'm sure Labour, although I don't vote Labour, I'm sure Labour have a plan to treat the people smugglers at source, and to provide places within countries where they can be processed, and so they don't have to come here. No, that's ridiculous. And the other thing is, where do you stand? Where does your morality come into this? We know you can't just throw everything out just because you want to break the rules. Any game is easy to win if you break the rules. And this is all about Rishi Sunak, desperate to get a plane off the ground to get to Rwanda, who are selling off, by the way, the accommodation that's supposed to be set for the refugees, and who there's not enough space for them. I mean, if he got a plane off the ground and a plane load there's no more accommodation. And then what? So this is all about this ridiculous farce of going to Rwanda. There are far better ways of dealing with this, and becoming a pariah on the world stage is not worth it.
Kevin, would this make us a pariah?
No, it wouldn't make us a pariah at all. And I've worked in the immigration business for a long, long time. And if I could have £1 for everybody who has lodged a claim under the ECHR and won it, I'll be a multi-millionaire, because people claim are under right to human life in the UK and win, because it's a ridiculous piece of legislation.
It's not a ridiculous piece of whatever laws we have should be administered properly. I mean, the Home Office is absolutely not fit for purpose. Look at the backlog. Look at and if they're kind of getting through the backlog more quickly, then they are not processing people properly.
Nina, do you think we wouldn't have human rights in this country without us belonging to the ECHR?
Well, of course we would have human rights, but many of our greatest laws against, for instance, sexual abuse and domestic violence came via the ECHR. You know, they have been, you know, fairly forward-thinking. We've kind of dragged our heels at times. So, you know, we need that to sort of aspire to.
Right, well, we started with Kevin, we ended with Nina. Thank you so much for both of your points of view there. Great debate, great back and forth, and no doubt this is a conversation that will run and run. I don't think we've quite settled it today.
Oh, I thought we were going to solve it.
On this episode
I thought
of
we were going to solve it.
Yeah, well, maybe next time.
We'll have to ask you to solve it for us at home. Let us know what you make of it. gbnews.com/your say is where you can get in touch. But coming up...
Yes, Britain is officially the world's 4th biggest exporter. Is this a Brexit success story, or is it just another bit of bad news? I don't know quite how it would be, but we'll get that after your headlines.
Good news.
It's 1:32. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your headlines. The Prime Minister says the plan is working as new NHS figures show hospital waiting lists in England have fallen for the 5th month in a row. Over 305,000 people have been waiting more than a year to start routine hospital treatment at the end of February. That's down from 321,000 at the end of January. The government and NHS England have pledged to eliminate all waiting lists of more than a year by March next year. A man has been remanded in custody after being charged with murdering a woman who was stabbed to death in the city as she walked her baby in a pram. 25-year-old Habibur Massam stood in front of a glass-fronted dock as he was told by District Judge Alex Boyd he will appear again at Bradford Crown Court on Friday. 27-year-old Consuma Akhtar died after being stabbed in Bradford on Saturday afternoon. A change in family visa rules comes into force today as part of the government's plan to reduce immigration. It's part of the Home Secretary's promise to transform the UK's immigration system, cut unfair levels of migration and ensure those arriving here do not burden the taxpayer. The measure will see the minimum income for family visas rise by more than £10,000 to £29,000, an increase of more than 55%. And a new poll suggests Rishi Sunak and other high-profile Tories could keep their seats because of voter ID confusion in the next general election. A poll by campaign group Best for Britain found 16% of people did not know that they would need a photo ID to vote in the upcoming local and general elections. The government passed the legislation in 2022, with the new rules coming into force last year. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2543 and €1.1688. The price of gold is £1,862.20 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,934 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. It's a much drier and brighter day for many areas of the UK today. It'll also feel quite warm in the sunshine, but if you're across the south coast, you're more likely to see cloudier skies and potentially some rain. That's because of this weather front that sunk southwards through tonight. It's going to linger for southern areas through the day. Much of the rain has pitted away from it, but if you're in southwestern areas, especially across parts of Cornwall, you're more likely to see some drizzly rain through much of the day. Clouds will be a little bit thicker as well, extending to more southeastern areas too. Elsewhere though, it should be a dry and bright day. It's going to feel warm in the sunshine, particularly across the east coast. We could see 20 degrees in parts of Cambridgeshire, for example, but temperatures climbing to the high teens quite widely. Through this evening, rain will return for northwestern areas, pushing into parts of Northern Ireland and then western Scotland. Elsewhere, though, it should stay largely dry, but clouds will thicken through the night. So it's going to be a bit of a dull evening and a dull start to the day, but it's going to be another mild start. Temperatures won't dip much below 10 degrees once again. In the far north of Scotland, you're likely to see a fairly bright start, but elsewhere, as I said, it's likely to be quite cloudy, with rain persisting across this northwestern patch through much of the day. Further south, for central areas of England, parts of Wales, the south coast too, some sunshine will break out, particularly as we head into the afternoon. It may be a little hazy, but it's going to feel warm in that sunshine once again, with temperatures likely climbing to above 20 degrees, which could make it the warmest day of the year so far.
The latest GB News travel.
Hello, I'm Jules Buckley. Let's go to Bootle on Merseyside. Firstly, Stanley Road, the A567, closed both ways, no way through between Marsh Lane and Knowsley Road. That's for a police incident. Westbound M4, a little bit slow, 8 and 9 Maidenhead to Wokingham and Bracknell at 10 westbound. There's a broken down vehicle being recovered there, so lane 1, the inside lane, is combed off. Slow north up the M11 just after Bishop Stortford, junction 8. In Dorset, the A35 in Bridport between the Monkeys Jump roundabout and the Esso roundabout closed off for emergency repairs. 2 lorries involved in a collision there, so it's causing queues. And in Bodmin in Cornwall, the Denison Road, the A389, closed between Cardale Road and the Texaco station for a police incident there as well. And that's your latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task. This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers. I agree. And that's precisely what I'll get. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
It's 1:38. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. Now, we've got some good news for you. Britain is now the world's 4th biggest exporter. We've overtaken France, we've overtaken the Netherlands, and we've overtaken even Japan.
Which Business Secretary Kemi Badenoch says shows the UK is punching above its weight on trade. This comes despite concerns that Brexit would, of course, hinder international trade. Well, it looks like for exports, it's been not too bad at all. Let's get the details now with GB News economics and business editor Liam Halligan with On the Money. Liam, little old us, 4th biggest exporter in the world. Is this true?
Little old us, yeah. The UK is the world's biggest exporter of financial services, by the way. Legal services, shipping insurance. Yeah, we are still a world-class economy in certain areas, and we're also the 8th biggest manufacturer in the world. So it's not all doom and gloom by any means. Let's have a look at these numbers. These numbers are produced by the United Nations, which for various historic reasons tends to be the world's sort of leading authority on trade data. And as Kemi Badenoch, the Trade Secretary, has been highlighting over the last 24 hours, we are now the 4th largest exporter in the world after China, the US and Germany. And that's up from 7th in 2021. So it's a big rate of growth. Part of the reason why our exports are up is the growth of what we call professional services. They are financial services, legal services, insurance. We've also been very good at exporting, by the way, education. Yes, educational services. And on top of that, a big chunk of this increase in exports, Tom and Emily, comes from the fact that the US has been exporting what we call liquefied natural gas, LNG, to Europe. And it's in order to replace Russian gas that Western Europe has been using. And those LNG gas exports from America now the biggest exporter of LNG in the world, it just overtook Qatar, they come through the UK because we have better LNG docking ports in Milford Haven, in Wales, also the Isle of Grain in Kent, than other European nations. So we re-export a lot of that LNG gas through our interconnectors, which of course adds value. It's also worth saying, even though our professional services exports are up, total goods exports actually fell 4.4% over the last year. That's the one bit of worrying news in these new statistics. Of course, our goods exports include our manufacturing exports. We are still a major manufacturer, as I said. But for me, that's the one blot on the landscape. We have had a lot more exports from the UK, including exports to the European Union, by the way, which are at record levels, quotes, despite Brexit. Partly because of those energy re-exports from the US via the UK that I just mentioned, but partly also because of services that we're managing to export to the European Union. But it is a shame, I think, that our goods exports are falling, and that's the one area where I'd like to see the UK's trade performance improving.
Which areas could we boost exports in then? Goods, that's a... that covers all industries, pretty much. What could we improve at? Cars? What other things? Where are we lacking?
I think where we're lacking, and it's a really good question, I think where we're lacking is in competitiveness. Our skills shortage is now pretty serious. There are lots of vacancies in the UK economy, even though there are quite a few people out of work. And there's often what economists call occupational mismatch in those job vacancies. So the vacancies are demanding skills that the people who aren't working often don't have. Or there's geographic mismatch. People live in places where the jobs aren't demanded, but there's a shortage of people in areas where the jobs are demanded. So we've got some concerns there. But the real big headline for me in terms of UK competitiveness, Emily, and why our goods exports as opposed to our service sector exports are diminishing a little bit, is the price of energy in the UK. We pay more for our electricity, households and particularly firms than any other major Western European economy. That's for all kinds of reasons that you and I and Tom have discussed many times here on GB News. So I would like to see much, much cheaper energy, such as they have in France with lots of nuclear, Spain, even in Germany, energy tends to be cheaper than here in the UK, even though Germany had a huge reliance on Russian gas for its manufacturing complex, if you like. So for me, it's about competitiveness of goods exports, in particular manufacturing exports. And as pretty much any manufacturer will tell you, it's a very, very energy-intensive business. And the price that our manufacturers have been paying for energy has been eye-watering over recent years, and there's not that much sign that it's coming down fast.
It's such a paradox about the UK economy. On the technical stuff, we do it so well. Financial services, bioscience, life sciences. But when it comes to basic things like energy, transport, housing, we're like a developing economy.
So frustrating.
We're upside down, aren't we? Liam Halligan, thank you so much for bringing us the very latest there. At least some good news there. Exports to now the fourth largest exporter.
I just wish we could have cheap energy in this country. Is it too much to ask? Is it too much to ask of our politicians to sort that one out?
It's frustrating that one of the reasons our exports are high is because we're re-exporting American gas that they have got through fracking. And that's something that we've banned in this country, that has remained banned for the decade. Imagine if we'd have been using our own natural gas and exporting that. How much higher could we be? Could we be third in the world?
We could be, perhaps. But it's good news that our exports are at a record level to the European Union. I like that one. Anyway, coming up, a man is suing the government for allegedly, get this, making him a climate refugee. What on earth is going on here? Could the ECHR be involved?
Farage, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m.
Good evening. Well, I thought it was an absolutely knockout front page of The Sun that went online last night and was on display all over the country today. Union joke, and there is. Well, you can just about make out that it's the Union flag, better known perhaps as the Union Jack, but they've decided to add pink and all sorts of colours to it, and that is on sale for fans going to the Olympics in France this year to buy and to wear, which led to a great big panic. What on earth would be on the shirts, shorts and kit of the athletes. Well, a statement did come out mid-morning from the British Olympic Association, which said all Team GB athletes will wear the Union Jack as normal in Paris. However, Team GB kit itself is expected to include different shades of blue or red as in previous years. Well, I'm sorry, I don't really buy that. Now, we sent Adam Cherry out to Wembley today to ask some members of the public how they felt about this.
This episode of Companies Fixing Things That Weren't Broken. We're going to be asking the people of London what they think of the changing colours of the Team GB Olympic logo. Take a look at this.
The blue, the red and the white, it's perfect. I feel like, you know, it shouldn't be that controversial, but, you know, it's iconic. I feel like the colours are iconic. Everyone's known London for being, you know, red, white and blue.
I feel like it doesn't really represent England like that. The colours of the colours are kind of random.
I think it's very colourful. It's very pinkish and quite unicornish kind of thing, yeah.
A bit too unicornish for Team GB.
A little bit.
Disgusting. Well, we're British. Their colours are not pink and purple and...
like, you know, some patterns on there, it's all going crazy.
That's not our flag. That don't represent me.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 48 minutes past 1. Now, a man claims to have been made a climate refugee after his home was demolished because of coastal erosion. Now, he's suing the government.
Yes, you might have thought perhaps this man lived in Bangladesh or the Maldives. No, very much in this country. Kevin Jordan said he'd lost everything after sea erosion saw his home demolished by the local council.
Well, the case comes after that landmark ECHR ruling backing Swiss elderly women, saying that inaction on climate change violates their fundamental human rights, irrespective of democratic outcomes. Well, joining us now is the senior meteorologist, Jim Dale. And Jim, is this chap, who I understand is in Norfolk, is he just being a bit cheeky? There's been coastal erosion there since time immemorial, and sometimes coasts erode. I mean, does he have a case here?
Yeah, OK, Tom. Good afternoon, Emily, Tom. Look, long time coming, this one. Emily, me and you met on the stairs a couple of days ago, and we were talking about this very briefly in terms of the ECHR ruling in Switzerland. Let's just say this is the start of things to come. Let's take a step backwards first, though, and say the reason these things are happening is because the climate is ramping, and not just in Bangladesh, not just in America, not just in Thailand and places like this, but yes, at home as well. And yes, Tom, coastal erosion has taken place in the past, but it's accelerated. And
Jim, what evidence do you have to show that? Because I'm willing to believe you that climate change is to blame for this chap losing his home, but I'm not convinced.
OK, well, the first thing to say is I can't rule. It's not my job, and perhaps not even your job, to rule on individual cases, because these cases will go to court, and it will be some judge sat there who will make the decision in terms of whether or not there's a plausible case. When these things turn up, and they will increasingly so, they need to be judged on their merit. And I can't say whether this particular place where this guy lives has suddenly accelerated. It probably has. Sea levels starting to rise. Certainly in terms of the number of storms and the ferocity of storms, that's all there. So The question is and he's taking the government to court, are they acting fast enough? Are they going in the right direction? My answer to that is no, they're not. They're in reverse. They're in denial to a large degree. They're pushing for new oil licenses, agreeing new oil licenses in the Rosebank field. So this is like going in the wrong direction.
Jim, this man is a self-professed climate warrior. He's just trying to make a political point here, isn't it? This is just activism.
Well, not necessarily. He's lost his house. I mean, it's hardly a political point when your house is gone.
But Jim, hang there are new oil and gas licenses in the North Sea. Yeah. Perfectly true. The macro picture here is that no country in the G20 has done more than the United Kingdom to reduce climate emissions. Indeed, fossil fuel emissions, CO2 emissions, down by half. 50% reduction since 1990. No other country, no other developed country has come anywhere close to the United Kingdom's record on that.
That's mainly the auspices of the private sector rather than necessarily the government. And I'm not saying the government have done nothing. They're just not moving fast enough. And now, on the back of what Reform are doing, they're trying to put the brakes on to take votes away from...
Here's the thing, if you buy a home on a floodplain, and you might expect this floodplain to flood once every 30 years. Let's say the climate warms up and that makes it more likely once every 10 years, right? Do you have a case against this government, this country, that's doing more than just about any other country in the world to try and slow that down? Surely that's insane.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that is why these things go to court to be argued and to be debated out. That's exactly the reason why. Whose fault is it? Because let's just say climate is something we're all joined at the hip. You know, doesn't matter which country you're in. We all got to do our little bit. And I'm not saying for one second that Britain is the worst case scenario. We could be doing better. But in this case, this guy can only take the British government to court. He can't take anybody else to court. So he's going through that process. He'll be the first one. And by the way, it won't be just governments going forward. It will be.
I mean, Jim. I feel sorry for this chap who's lost his home, but we're just reading today as well that China has added 47.4 gigawatts of new coal power in the last year. That's more than double the amount added by the rest of the entire world. I mean, whatever our government does, it's not going to counteract that, is it? It's going to have absolutely no impact on the erosion of this coast.
Emily, I read exactly the same, and yeah, my jaw opened in exactly the same way. When you look at what China are up to in terms of their coal emissions, that's the wrong message, and hopefully, whether they can do it or not, Chinese people will take their government to court in the future when they get climate problems going forward. But look, yeah, we've all got to do our little bit, and if this guy feels that this government is responsible to whatever degree for his house falling into the sea, then so be it. That's a test case. That's what we go through. That's what the Swiss ladies went through in exactly the same way and won their case. I just make a marker here in the sand. These are the first of many going forward. So,
I think you're right. I think you're right on that, Jim. I think you are right. And that ECHR ruling 2 days ago certainly shows the direction of travel. Thank you very much indeed, Jim Dale. Always great to speak to you, senior meteorologist. Well then, let us know what you make of all that.
I'm sorry, if you buy a house on a cliff, is it really going to have sped up that much in the last... Your house was falling off the cliff anyway. If it falls off this year as opposed to next year and you say it's been marginally sped up, do you have a case against the government? Really?
Well, clearly you do. And we spoke about China. Now we're going to be speaking about China again after the break because it might have something to do with Britain's influx of counterfeit stamps.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. It's a much drier and brighter day for many areas of the UK today. It'll also feel quite warm in the sunshine, but if you're across the south coast, you're more likely to see cloudier skies and potentially some rain. That's because of this weather front that sunk southwards through tonight. It's going to linger for southern areas through the day. Much of the rain has pitted away from it, but if you're in southwestern areas, especially across parts of Cornwall, you're more likely to see some drizzly rain through much of the day. Clouds will be a little bit thicker as well, extending to more southeastern areas too. Elsewhere though, it should be a dry and bright day. It's going to feel warm in the sunshine, particularly across the east coast. We could see 20 degrees in parts of Cambridgeshire, for example, but temperatures climbing to the high teens quite widely. Through this evening, rain will return for northwestern areas, pushing into parts of Northern Ireland and then western Scotland. Elsewhere, though, it should stay largely dry, but clouds will thicken through the night. So it's going to be a bit of a dull evening and a dull start to the day, but it's going to be another mild start. Temperatures won't dip much below 10 degrees once again. In the far north of Scotland, you're likely to see a fairly bright start, but elsewhere, as I said, it's likely to be quite cloudy, with rain persisting across this northwestern patch through much of the day. Further south, for central areas of England, parts of Wales, the south coast too, some sunshine will break out, particularly as we head into the afternoon. It may be a little hazy, but it's going to feel warm in that sunshine once again, with temperatures likely climbing to above 20 degrees, which could make it the warmest day of the year so far.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Variety Cruises have been sailing since 1942, and thanks to them, you could set sail in 2025. You have the chance to win a 7-night small boat cruise for two worth £10,000. With your flights, meals, drinks and excursions included, you can choose from any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and find your home at sea. You'll also win an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash that you can use to make this summer spectacular. We'll also treat you to these luxury travel gifts. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task. This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers. I agree. And that's precisely what I'll get. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Thursday, the 11th of April.
It is indeed. Now, NHS waiting lists have fallen for a 5th month in a row. Rishi Sunak claims strike action has hindered his progress, but insists he's still making headway. Shadow Health Secretary tells GB News he doesn't know why the Prime Minister is doing a victory lap.
This comes as the PM faces a rebellion if he decides to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. Both the Chancellor, the Home Secretary, have voiced opposition to leaving.
And as the UK is flooded with fake stamps, reportedly from China, we're asking if this really could be Beijing embarking on economic warfare against us. Hope not.
Now, I find this a very curious one. We've been talking about stamps on GB News for quite some time. It was after, in fact, viewers and people who read the website started writing in saying, I'm getting charged for sending letters. Turns out there is it's endemic. Counterfeit stamps within the United Kingdom.
Well, yeah, the recipients are being charged to receive letters.
Yes.
So people are buying these dodgy stamps totally unknowingly, and then their recipients are getting fleeced.
But it turned out there's another twist in the tale, and that twist is that could the Chinese be involved? And I just think of all the sort of arms of economic warfare you could sort of whack the United Kingdom with. Stamps?
It's not what you would expect, is it? It's not what you would expect from a hostile state.
Oh, turn off the nuclear power stations. Make everyone's iPhones explode. Stamps?
Don't give them ideas.
Oh, goodness me. If everyone's iPhones explode, I'll take that as entirely my fault.
But the difficulty is that you can't really tell the difference between the real postage stamps and the counterfeit ones.
No.
Until you're slapped with a fine.
Well, this is the thing. We've been looking at some of these comparisons, and they look identical, but the barcode is the way to tell, because they're scanned, and obviously if the barcode doesn't match, they can't be sent and they have to charge the recipient.
Well, this hour we're going to get to the bottom of all this. Do you believe that China could possibly be doing this as a economic warfare? Quite incredible. gbnews.com/your say. Yes, stick with us. It's your headlines.
Good afternoon. It's 2:02. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your top story this hour: the Prime Minister says the plan is working as new NHS figures show hospital waiting lists in England have fallen for a fifth month in a row. Over 305,000 people have been waiting for more than a year to start routine hospital treatment at the end of February. That's down from 321,000 at the end of January. The government and NHS England have pledged to eliminate all waiting lists of more than a year by March next year. Rishi Sunak said there's more to be done, though.
Well, when I became Prime Minister, I said that cutting waiting lists was one of my 5 priorities. And whilst we haven't made as much progress as I would have liked, today's figures show that we are making headway towards that goal. Over the last 5 months, a reduction of around 200,000 in the overall waiting lists, which is positive. And if it wasn't for industrial action, an extra 430,000 patients would have been treated. So whilst there's, of course, a lot more work to do, the plan is working.
Nearly half of workers have spent time looking at jobs outside the NHS, according to new analysis. Researchers have found around 47% have looked at employment outside the NHS, with 14% applying for non-NHS jobs between March and June last year. It's understood stress, workload, staff shortages and pay are the top reasons for staff leaving the NHS. In other news, a man has been remanded in custody after being charged with murdering a woman who was stabbed to death in a city while she walked her baby in a pram. 25-year-old Habibur Massam stood in front of a glass-fronted dock as he was told by the court that he would appear again at Bradford Court tomorrow. He spoke only to confirm his name, date of birth and address during the 6-minute-long hearing. 27-year-old Kulsuma Akhtar died after being stabbed in Bradford on Saturday afternoon. A change to family visa rules comes into force today as part of the government's plan to reduce immigration. It's part of the Home Secretary's promise to transform the UK's immigration system, cut unfair levels of migration and ensure those arriving here do not burden the taxpayer. The measure will see the minimum income for family visas rise by more than £10,000 to £29,000, an increase of more than 55%. By early 2025, this will have increased 2 more times, rising to £38,700. A Moroccan asylum seeker on trial for the murder of a pensioner told police he was motivated by the conflict in Gaza. 45-year-old Ahmed Alid denies murdering 70-year-old Terence Carney in Hartlepool town centre, as well as the attempted murder of his housemate, Yavid Nouri. He says he carried out the attacks as an act of revenge for what he says Israel killing children in Palestinian conflict. He is also accused of assaulting 2 female police officers who had interviewed him after his arrest. And the Royal Mail says it's working to remove counterfeit stamps from circulation after reports of fake ones. It follows calls from GBNews for Royal Mail to investigate its systems after an investigation. The Telegraph reported China is flooding Britain with counterfeit Royal Mail stamps as small retailers are buying forgeries online. It's understood that the fakes were causing a rise in complaints that stamps bought from legitimate stores were being deemed fraudulent, which can result in a £5 penalty. And Britain's greatest rower has questioned the decision to award prize money to track and field gold medalists at the Paris Olympics this summer. Sir Steve Redgrave, who has won 5 gold medals in 5 consecutive Olympics, says that rewarding the best-paid athletes with a cash prize is the wrong decision for the Games and that money should go to poorer sports.
There are certain sports that are more privileged financially than others, but that's the whole thing about the Olympics, is that you're coming along, everyone's on a level platform from that, and you're making this into a 2-tier process of being able to afford. Surely you can do something much better than giving those athletes that are probably earning much more than that already to other sports or developing your own sport. Let's have a little bit of lateral thinking. This is for me, is the wrong direction.
And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 7 minutes past 2. Now, the NHS has had some rare welcome news today as its waiting lists have fallen for the 5th month in a row.
Yes, cutting NHS waiting lists was, of course, one of Rishi Sunak's top 5 priorities, and he said the statistics clearly show the government is making headway. But here's what Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting told us earlier.
I don't know why Rishi Sunak's doing a victory lap. Waiting lists are higher than they were when he became Prime Minister. He's promised to cut NHS waiting lists. And you also look at the performance standards on things like A&E, ambulance response times. They are shockingly bad to the extent that people can no longer be certain that whether they dial 999 with suspected heart attack or stroke or walk into A&E, that they're going to be seen on time in the right way. So I think by now, hopefully, people have reached a conclusion that the longer the Conservatives are in power, the longer patients will wait. Labour has a proud record on the NHS, the shortest waiting times and the highest patient satisfaction on record. But even more importantly, when looking to the future, we've got a plan to get our NHS back on its feet, whether that's 2 million more appointments a year to cut waiting lists, fully costed, fully funded through extra evening and weekend working, doubling the number of scanners so that people get diagnosed earlier, treated faster, training up thousands more GPs and cutting through red tape. I mean, I could go on, Chris, and the point is that unless you have that comprehensive plan that looks at the whole system, you're not going to get the NHS out of this terrible mess the Conservatives are.
Wes Streeting there saying to Chris that he could go on and on. Well, let's cross to Chris now and see what he made of the whole affair. Because Wes Streeting is always a very competent communicator. But I suppose if you're a Labour Party politician, you'll say waiting lists are higher than they were when Sunak became PM. If you're a Conservative Party politician, you'll say, look at the last 5 months, they've been going down and down. Yes, they went up for a while, but now they're on the right path. I mean, they're both right.
Yeah, they're both right. Hello, both. They are both right. And the point is, of course, that we have had this COVID pandemic and since the Tories came to power in 2019. And Wes Streeting was making the point that since Mr Sunak became Prime Minister in 2022, it's gone up by over 300,000 or 300,000 more than it was then. So, yeah, he can make these points. I was struck also in an interview which aired an hour or so ago on your show, how he said that Labour would use private healthcare to clear that backlog. All of those could go with private healthcare, Wes Streeting said. But I thought it was a real moment there for the Labour Party going after sort of Tory voters, showing that they're not going to allow or let some kind of sort of clinging to the idea of a national health service to get in the way of stopping people suffering. Because each one of those 7.54 million people waiting for treatment are in some sort of pain, some discomfort. And while MPs might, and indeed PMs might claim a win 5 months in a row, it's still well over 7.5 million people waiting for care, and they are in pain, and that is a service not working for them, and that we're all paying taxes to cover that.
Yes, I'm not sure where all this spare capacity in the private sector is coming from, but it's clear he wants to be bold when it comes to the NHS. He wants NHS workers to be working around the clock. He wants to use the private sector to cut waiting lists. He wants to take on vested interests. He wants to take on the middle-class lefties who don't like the sound of any private sector involvement. Can he do it with the likes of the BMA?
I think if you're taking a look at it, I think Labour has the permission to do this kind of reform, which the Tories don't. That in a sense that ever since David Cameron took over as leader back in the mid-noughties, and he said that the NHS will not be touched but if I'm Prime Minister, the Tories have failed really to do proper reform there. Obviously, Andrew Lansley did his work with GPs and combined commissioning groups. But I think if you take a step back, really the only proper root and branch reform can be done by a Labour government, because they have the permission to do it from unions and from their own supporters. That's certainly what friends of Mr. Streeting think, that they've got a chance to do some real change here. I think, and when we asked him in that interview earlier, will you take on the unions? Will you face down these vested interests on behalf of patients? He made clear he would. I mean, I think what is interesting about Mr. Streeting is he's putting himself in the shoes of the patient. I think often in his conversations about the NHS, we hear a lot about employers, the government, or the NHS against the unions, but the voice of the patient is never heard. And I think if Labour can put their feet in the shoes of the patient, they won't go very far wrong.
Well, the Labour Party, of course, has been whacking the Prime Minister today, but it's not only from the Prime Minister's left that he's taken a beating. Boris Johnson, of all people, has been talking in the last 24 hours. Chris, where is he and what's he said?
That's right. He's over in Canada. In the middle of the night, he did some chat about his legacy. Of course, he's meant to be working on a book about Shakespeare. He's meant to be working for a book on his memoirs. He spoke about this smoking ban, which Mr. Sunak announced in his October speech in the Tory conference last year. He said he questioned why it's happening. The party of Churchill wants to ban cigars, he said. Donnez-moi un break, as they say in Quebec, Francophone Quebec, of course. He knows Churchill well. He wrote the book on Churchill, The Churchill Factor. The reason why this matters and why it's a total pain for Number 10 is that next Tuesday is the vote on the Tobacco and Vapes Bill in the House of Commons, the second reading, and that's the opportunity for Tory MPs to rebel and to send a message back to Number 10 that why are we banning things as a Tory government? I think that's why the tie. He doesn't say things by accident, Boris Johnson. He's speaking out now on a Thursday as MPs can think about what he's saying and then vote for or against the plans on Tuesday. Very embarrassing if this must get through with Labour support, as might be the case.
The difference between us Conservatives and our opponents is that every time their instincts are always about control and expropriation and coercion and taking your money and spending it on your behalf and regulating your lives, and we are on the whole in favour of freedom. When I look at some of the things that we're doing now, I think that are being done in the name of conservatism, I think they're absolutely nuts. But we're banning cigars. And what is? I mean, maybe you all think that's a great idea. I just can't see what is the point of banning? Well, the party of Winston Churchill wants to ban. I mean, donnez-moi un break, as they say in Quebec. It's just mad.
Boris Johnson there talking about why he thinks that the cigarettes and smoking and cigars, particularly for the Tories, shouldn't be banned.
Oh, he's a class act, isn't he?
Don't you love a backseat, Prime Minister? Thank you very much indeed, Christopher Hope there, our political editor, bringing us up to speed as always. Right, well, let's talk to Lucy Johnston, Health and Social Affairs Editor at the Sunday Express. Lucy, I guess Wes Streeting is making quite a strong pitch that he'll be the man who's going to transform the NHS and get rid of all these waiting lists. But lots of people are getting in touch and saying, well, they're not doing such a fab job in Wales.
No, and that's true. There's often a comparison with Wales. When you look at the whole picture, the waiting lists couldn't really get any worse. There's 1 in 7 of us on a waiting list. And if you look back to 2010, we had 2.5 billion on the waiting list. So we need to knock billions off in order to bring it back to that, and bring it back to pre-pandemic levels. And just say that we've reduced it by 200,000 over the last 5 months, it's not enough. It's a drop in the ocean.
No, it does sometimes feel like that drop in an ocean. But I suppose the other big health issue, related, of course, and we've been discussing it here, we've just heard from the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson on this cigarette ban. I suppose the medical community is quite in favour of this, but we do know that the tax that is collected from cigarettes does go a long way to help fund the NHS. I mean, this is not a clear-cut issue, is it?
It certainly isn't. I think banning things is very controversial, and there's not really good evidence that doing that really wipes out the problem or stops people doing things. And often people just turn to different prices, if you know what I mean. So I'm not sure whether they're posturing or what the idea is there. We know that there's been increasing numbers of younger people, particularly, who are starting to vape instead, and younger people are now smoking because they're worried about vaping, because there's emerging evidence.
It's a bit like whack-a-mole, isn't it? Lucy, I'm terribly sorry, but your line is a little bit dodgy and we can barely make out what you're saying. But we'll speak to you again soon. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your day. Lucy Johnston there from the Sunday Express, Health and Social...
apologies for the audio.
Yes, it was a bit rubbish, wasn't it? Sometimes these things just happen.
Well, today marks the first day of the trial of Moroccan national Ahmed Alid of Hartlepool, charged with murdering Terence Carney in October last year.
Yes, today the court heard Ahmed Alid shouted Allah Akbar, meaning God is great, as he stabbed Javed Nouri, his housemate, in the chest.
Well, GB News Yorkshire and Humber reporter Anna Riley is outside Teesside Crown Court for us and can let us know what's been going on today. Anna.
Yes, as you say, it's the first day of the trial for Ahmed Alid. He is accused of the murder of Terence Carney, a 70-year-old man. He's also accused of the attempted murder of Javed Nouri, his housemate, and also the assault of 2 police officers. These are charges that he denies, but the prosecution say that the defendant wanted to kill both Mr. Nouri and Mr. Carney because of the conflict in Gaza and to further his desire that Palestine would be free from the Zionists, by which he meant Israel, and that the defendant said he would have killed more people if he had been able to do so. And just to outline the facts of the case to you, this is alleged to have happened on the 15th of October last year. The prosecution said that Alid shared a house with 3 other asylum seekers, that Alid's a Moroccan national, and that this housing was provided by the Home Office in Hartlepool, and that at first he got on with his housemate, Mr. Nouri. He believed that he was a Muslim and that he complimented him on cleaning the house and said that cleanliness was the sign of being a good Muslim. But it's when it emerged that Mr. Nouri had converted from the Islam faith to become a Christian and started visiting the local church in Hartlepool that this was something that Alid did not like, with his other housemates describing him as being very much into his religion. And it was on the morning of the 15th of October, the prosecution say that the defendant burst into the room of his housemate and shouted Allah Akbar, God is great, as he stabbed his housemate who was asleep several times. That's the attempted murder charge. Mr. Nouri managed to fight him off, and another housemate called the police. The 999 recording was played in which Allah Akbar was heard being shouted by the defendant in the background. And then the prosecution say that the defendant left the house heading towards the centre of Hartlepool, and that was where he stabbed Mr. Carney to death. We've also heard evidence as well that he's been accused of assaulting 2 emergency workers, police officers, during his questioning. And this trial continues.
Riley, for bringing us that shocking detail there from Hartlepool. We'll bring you any updates as that trial goes on.
Really shocking stuff there. But the latest on what's being described as economic warfare from China. We'll bring you the details next.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Offline and overlooked. That's what Age UK say millions of British pensioners are. Why? Because they cannot or won't access the internet. It's leading to digital exclusion. So the charity's campaigning for public services like banks, utilities and even the NHS to maintain a more human approach.
Everything's online. People assume you've got a smartphone with a mobile number and an email, and without that you don't exist in this world anymore. We've got to try and get the government to see that it's so important to make people feel that they belong, because there's a feeling that the older generation just feel that they're forgotten, they're in the way, and we already know that anyway. It's just another reason for them to feel that they're not wanted. They'll just accept it and they'll say, well, that's it, I can't do it anymore, and that's it, whereas other people would be really kicking and screaming. So we need to be the voice for older people.
Despite digital technology playing an increasing role in our lives, around 1 in 5 over 65s in the UK don't use the internet. Thornycroft Centre in Pontefract, West Yorkshire provides a space for this age group to socialise and get help to go online.
I'm not that good with mobiles, so when you mention anything about online, I ain't a clue what you're talking about.
The closure of thousands of banks is also detrimental to the older generation.
A lot of our members what come, they tend to use cash. They don't like to use bank cards. I think a lot of it's trust or the lack of knowledge. They don't understand how it works. I think they're very vulnerable as well with online. It's really important that they're aware how to use it and how to use it safely.
So, in an online era, it's still crucial for many to have an offline option.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, welcome back. It's 2:24. You are, of course, watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. Now, a GB News investigation found that counterfeit stamps are flooding Britain, with some recipients being charged £5 just to receive their post.
And according to an investigation from The Telegraph picking up on this, China could well be behind it.
Yes, security experts and MPs are calling the masses of fraudulent stamps an act of economic warfare, although China is denying wrongdoing.
As they always do. But let's get to the bottom of it now. Ray Addison, our reporter, joins us now. And Ray, what on earth is going on here? And is it really credible to suggest that China is behind this?
Well, it's certainly an interesting one. I'm here in Horsham in West Sussex, where Rishi Sunak
was yesterday. Now, he was looking at ways to tackle retail crime. He was inside the Swan Walk shopping centre behind me visiting the Boots. Now, he may be wishing today that he'd actually gone into the nearby post office and asked them some questions in there, because this is certainly a scandal which is continuing to grow in pace. Now, of course, we've heard about our investigation. The Daily Telegraph investigation as well has identified 4 Chinese suppliers, they say, offering to print up to 1 million counterfeit stamps every single week and then selling them on for as little as 4 pence each into the UK. Now, they're being then brought from online sites, and including websites claiming to be the official Royal Mail store. And then they're being bought unknowingly by wholesalers and by small retailers, and then, of course, into the pockets of GB News viewers and people around the UK. Of course, this all comes after that GB News investigation that found that Britons across the UK are being charged £5 for allegedly dodgy stamps, which they felt that they'd brought from official channels, but in some cases it's turning out then to be counterfeits. Now, of course, shoppers are saying to us here at GB News that Royal Mail has a responsibility now to find and destroy these counterfeits, or they may simply stop using stamps altogether. This is what they had to say.
Well, it concerns me that the wholesalers, the UK wholesalers, are getting them mixed up in their supplies. It raises some questions as to why that's happening and where they get their stamps from.
It said Royal Mail on the front. I mean, the fake ones are also the same Royal Mail, so just have to hope, don't I?
I work in aviation, and there's millions of fake parts going around now these days, so you have a problem in the whole world of fakes going onto the market, and how do you spot them?
Well, shoppers obviously very concerned that when they buy those stamps from official channels and they put their letter in these post boxes, they should expect that it will arrive safely. However, increasingly it would appear that there are concerns over that and it's just simply not happening. Now, the Royal Mail is saying that they're working hard to remove counterfeit stamps from circulation. They regularly monitor online marketplaces to detect suspicious activity, and they work closely with retailers and law enforcement as well. However, this is apparently a growing problem.
Yes, well, Ray, the Royal Mail don't need this, do they? They've had quite a few PR problems recently, what with trying to reduce the number of, They were trying to reduce the days that you could actually receive post and that the posties would be out and about. They've had all sorts of complaints about how costly the service is. And then for this to happen, you can't even trust a stamp.
If you can't trust a stamp, what can you trust? Sorry, go on.
No, absolutely. I was just going to say, I don't know if we can see it now, but if you just pan around there, there's actually a card shop just down there. This is the market, the Thursday market here in Horsham. There's a card shop just down there by the Swan Walk. We were chatting to the lady earlier that owns it and runs it, and she was saying that increasingly, when people do come and buy cards, they don't even then post them. They simply take them or send them, hand deliver them directly to their friends.
Really?
She says the days where people would actually post these cards off for people are just really kind of come and gone now, and I think this is just going to add to that mistrust, these concerns over delivery times, concerns over the rising price of stamps itself, but now of course concerns that when you do buy a stamp it may not be legit.
No, really, really interesting stuff. Thank you very much, Ray Addison there, talking to us from Horsham. Now, joining us is Royal Mail customer Natasha, who received an apology from the Royal Mail after buying a counterfeit stamp from the post office. Natasha, this is a fascinating story. How did you get this apology?
Well, it wasn't an easy one, I have to admit. Tenacity was required. I had complained to them via having the same experience with an alleged counterfeit stamp on a letter that I'd sent to a niece of mine. And I received the letter back with the fact that it couldn't be delivered to the recipient because they hadn't paid the £2.50 penalty as it was back in 2023. And knowing that I'd purchased the stamp from legitimate sources, in fact, a post office, I thought I just wanted to follow this through and see where I could get to with it, really. So I sent the original envelope and stamp off to Royal Mail customer services team, didn't hear anything back, followed it up with email after email, and just kept on getting fobbed off, really, with the fact that you know, we have robust systems in place and we've investigated this and we found that our decision still stands and that the stamp was counterfeit. And then eventually there was a breakthrough, but the apology came from the post office as opposed to Royal Mail, along with a £25 cash voucher. But it's an interesting story, and I'm quite intrigued to see how this all unravels, because there seem to be quite a lot of news networks picking up on this. And given that I know that the stamp I used was purchased from the post office itself and was a book of multiple stamps, I find it quite strange to wonder how one counterfeit stamp found its way into a book of authentic stamps and the others all got used and delivered completely okay.
That's very strange indeed, because some people assume that these counterfeit stamps must have been bought off an online website like Amazon or some other service where they're not all checked. But actually, to buy it from the post office itself, you're not expecting that. What do you make of the suggestion that China might have something to do with this? People are saying this could be all coming from that country.
Well, isn't that interesting? I mean, I find, you know, stamps are relatively low-value items to fake. It's not like you're, you know, doing counterfeit £50 notes, but there's got to be an awful lot of them in the system somewhere. And to the layman, you just can't tell whether it's a real one or not a real one. But yeah, that's an interesting angle that I'm sure GB News are going to follow up on, and I certainly, for one, will be following it.
Marvellous. Well, Natasha, thank you very much for joining us, and congratulations that you managed to get some compensation. It's a tricky thing to do, and your tenacity has paid off.
Yes, let's hope if you use it to buy stamps, they won't be counterfeit. They'll be legitimate. But coming up in what's been described as a desperate relaxation of the rules, get this, anyone seeking to join the Royal Navy will no longer need to prove that they can swim. What on earth is this about?
It's 2:32. I'm Sophia Wenslet in the GB newsroom. Your headlines. The Prime Minister says the plan is working as new NHS figures show hospital waiting lists in England have fallen for the 5th month in a row. Over 305,000 people have been waiting for more than a year to start routine hospital treatment at the end of February. That's down from 321,000 at the end of January. The government and NHS England have pledged to eliminate all waiting lists of more than a year by March of next year. Rishi Sunak says there's more to be done. A man has been remanded in custody after being charged with murdering a woman who was stabbed to death in the city as she walked her baby in a pram. 25-year-old Habibur Massam stood in the grass-fronted dock as he was told by District Judge Alex Boyd he will appear again at Bradford Crown Court on Friday. 27-year-old Kulsuma Akhtar died after being stabbed in Bradford on Saturday afternoon. A change to family visa rules comes into force today as part of the government's plan to reduce immigration. It's part of the Home Secretary's promise to transform the UK's immigration system, cut unfair levels of migration and ensure those arriving here do not burden the taxpayer. The measure will see the minimum income for family visas rise by more than £10,000 to £29,000, an increase of more than 55%. And a new poll suggests Rishi Sunak and other high-profile Tories could keep their seats because of voter ID confusion in the next general election. A poll by campaign group Best for Britain found 16% of people did not know that they would need photo ID to vote in the upcoming local and general elections. The government passed the legislation in 2022, with the new rules coming into force last year. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather update. It's a much drier and brighter day for many areas of the UK today. It'll also feel quite warm in the sunshine, but if you're across the south coast, you're more likely to see cloudier skies and potentially some rain. That's because of this weather front that sunk southwards through tonight. It's going to linger for southern areas through the day. Much of the rain has pitted away from it, but if you're in southwestern areas, especially across parts of Cornwall, you're more likely to see some drizzly rain through much of the day. Clouds will be a little bit thicker as well, well, extending to more southeastern areas too. Elsewhere, though, it should be a dry and bright day. It's going to feel warm in the sunshine, particularly across the east coast. We could see 20 degrees in parts of Cambridgeshire, for example, but temperatures climbing to the high teens quite widely. Through this evening, rain will return for northwestern areas, pushing into parts of Northern Ireland and then western Scotland. Elsewhere, though, it should stay largely dry, but clouds will thicken through the night. So it's going to be a bit of a dull evening and a dull start to the day, but it's going to be another mild start. Temperatures won't dip much below 10 degrees once again. In the far north of Scotland, you're likely to see a fairly bright start, but elsewhere, as I said, it's likely to be quite cloudy, with rain persisting across this northwestern patch through much of the day. Further south, for central areas of England, parts of Wales, the south coast too, some sunshine will break out, particularly as we head into the afternoon. It may be a little hazy, but it's going to feel warm in that sunshine once again, with temperatures likely climbing to above 20 degrees, which could make it the warmest day of the year so far.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. Let's go to the M62. Firstly, eastbound Birchwood to Eccles. That's 11 to junction 12. A lane shut for a breakdown. An obstruction part blocking the southbound M42. The inside lane's coned off. That's Tamworth at 10, slow going down towards Coleshill at junction 9. Queues northbound for the M6 in the West Midlands this lunchtime from the M5 at 8 up to Wednesbury at 9. There's a broken down car queuing back to Great Barrett to junction 7. In Essex, northbound M11 struggling. Bishop Stortford to Saffron Walden. That's junction 8 to 9, slow going. There were emergency repairs. They've now been completed, but it's still queuing. And on the ferries on DFDS, delays are up to an hour between Dover and Dunkirk. That's due to technical problems. And for now, that's your latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 37 minutes past 2. Now, here's something to raise your spirits. Take a look at this scene in Canada after MPs voted down a motion that would have made the oath to King Charles, the monarch of Canada, as well as the monarch of the United Kingdom, optional.
Nays pour 113, 113. Nays contre 197, 197.
Je déclare la motion rejetée.
The Canadian Parliament there in a spontaneous rendition of God Save the King, keeping that oath to His Majesty when they swear in.
Made you happy, didn't it, Tom?
Made me very happy.
Made you very happy. Tom spotted this clip earlier in the day and he said, we must play this.
We absolutely
must. Have some
must.
uplifting news for once. But it was quite funny, that clip, actually. The speaker looked like as if the song was a rendition for him, who stood there listening. He said, order, order, and then he just let it happen.
It's funny.
He just let it happen.
Do you know what's actually quite so funny about this? Because, of course, Canada is a bilingual country, French and English. And the only other place I've seen something like this happen is in the French Parliament, when they sang up and stood up and sang La Marseillaise, and sang their anthem. I don't think there are many singing parliaments in the world, but perhaps this is a unique combination of French and British. In Canada, you get the sort of instinct to sing, but also the royalism and the patriotism.
Well, perhaps, can anyone remember a time when we've seen an eruption of song in the Houses of Parliament, in the House of Commons?
Not allowed to sing.
Not
allowed to sing, not allowed to
Well, a lot
clap.
of things are banned, but people still do them. Our politicians still do them.
That's true.
Yes, when did they ban drinking alcohol in there?
They haven't banned it. They haven't banned it.
You can still do it if you're the Chancellor.
If you're the Chancellor delivering a budget statement, you're allowed to drink.
They never do it.
The last one was Ken Clarke when he was Chancellor, and he was announcing a cut in I think it was whiskey duty, and took a swig of whiskey as he did it. And
It's all a bit pompous and theatrical, isn't it, really?
But that's exactly what Parliament should be.
Bit pompous.
Bring back the top hats, I say.
Bit pompous.
You used to have to cover your head with a top hat if you had a point of order to make during a division. Now, they kept a collapsible top hat under the Speaker's chair, and when someone has stood up to make a point of order, Betty Boothroyd, there's video of this, shouting, "Get the hat!"
Not sure they'd let you in with that tie.
I think they would let me in with this tie. This is a lot more... Well, thankfully...
Your little skinny tie?
Thankfully, ties have been brought back in the House of Commons after John Bercow banned them. It's a glorious tie.
I must say, not to to bash women at all, but some of the standards among the female MPs have slipped recently, I'd say.
What, in terms of just quality or
Should
dress?
be able to wear leggings, really, or,
No.
I don't know, leopard print. I don't know, maybe we can have a bit of leopard print in the House of Commons.
I'm not sure. Only on shoes.
Only on shoes, yes, Theresa May and her fabulous shoes. There you go, fashion icon for the years. Anyway, should we move on?
Let's move on.
Shall we move on?
Well, a GB News investigation has revealed that the Home Office is unable to say how many foreign national offender deportation orders it issued last year.
Well, responding to a Freedom of Information request, the department said it was unable to confirm figures due to a disruption to its data systems. Oh, well, that's great, isn't it? Lots of confidence there. Joining us now is our reporter who broke the story, Charlie Peters. Why has this happened?
It's a good question, Emily. Well, last year, the Chief Inspector of the Borders said that the Home Office was having a significant issue with its data management systems. Indeed, the Foreign National Offender Returns Command did say that there was no single version of the truth that they were comfortable with in that report. We also heard from a staff member anonymously contributing to that report saying that they would not be confident revealing any of that data to the public, and they were glad it wasn't up to them. Well, last month we heard from the Illegal Migration Minister, Michael Tomlinson, who in Parliament said that the last bit of deportation order data they had was from September 2022. So we asked if they had any from 2010 to 2023. They said it would be too expensive to gather that information, again, due to an overhaul of their information management systems due to that crisis found by the inspector last year, that disruption causing a problem. And then when I went to the Home Office more directly and said, OK, if you can't do that full stretch due to the cost and the changes, can you at least just give me 2023? And they couldn't do it. As you can imagine, that's attracted some concern because while they're able to publish the latest deportation data, the orders do matter because that could display a gap between the number of people they want to remove and the number that they are actually removing. Last night, senior Home Office figures speaking confidentially to GB News told me that they were concerned that the detention estate had been reduced too significantly, just 2,200 spaces available to hold people during this process, which was leading to delays, allowing legal interruptions, judicial reviews, delays, and eventually cancellation of the process. They reassured me, though, that some of the most dangerous offenders that this country tries to remove are successfully taken away on escorted, chartered flights, in particular to Jamaica and Albania. Those two countries in particular were pointed out to me as recent successes. However, it is concerning that we do have this information that they are unable to confirm the number of orders issued last year. Now, the Home Office told me that they did not recognise the claims that we were making and the concerns. They said that they regularly publish data on the Home Office. But when it comes to this data, I did not get any.
It's just extraordinary. It seems that we keep hearing stories about how the Home Office has lost this bit of data, that's gone missing, this broke down. I mean, this is just a fundamentally incompetent department.
Well, that is the criticism being made by Rob Bates, the research director at the Centre for Migration Control, who told me in reaction to this story that this is a rudimentary part of national security. We need to have this data. It's about transparency. It's vital. And he said that too many well-paid bureaucrats in the Home Office were missing this information. I think it's important to note, Tom, that This story has come at a time when transparency of data in the Home Office, in particular around migration, has been such a leading issue in our national conversation. Robert Jenrick, the former migration minister, is currently pushing for an amendment to the Criminal Justice Bill that would require the government to publish data around immigration status and visa status and indeed nationality for any criminals, which could give a further indication of deportation status and indeed to what extent the government is successfully achieving those goals. But one thing is for certain, they don't have the data of orders that they've issued for 2023. Could there be a significant gap between the number of people they're getting on flights and those they want to put on them? As it stands, we just don't know.
Thanks, Charlie. Charlie Peters there, our reporter. Great investigation. It seems to me that the Home Office officials sometimes just seem surprised that someone would bother asking such a question. I mean, it's quite important for us to know if there is a mismatch between the number of deportation orders coming from the Home Office and actually the number of people who are deported. That would be quite important, considering that the Home Office manages to not just only lose data or not be able to compile it for us, but also they lose people.
They certainly...
Which is arguably more important. Well, isn't more important.
Yes, yes. And it just seems that this is one of the biggest departments of government, hires such a large workforce, and it just isn't on top of everything. I mean, there's probably an argument to break apart the Home Office and do separate functions in different sort of sub-departments.
And also ideological problems within the Home Office. I mean, Stephen Edgington, our reporter, he's also been... finding out what's going on behind the scenes with all these bizarre workshops and diversity and inclusion events and waste of taxpayer money. There you go, that's the Home Office for you.
Well, coming up, we'll slowly approach the summer holiday season, but stay wary. Holiday scams. You're going away next week.
Oh, I am, yeah.
There you go, summer holiday season.
See ya.
Stay wary. Holiday scams are on the rise. And has Emily Carver fallen victim?
I really hope
More on
not.
that shortly.
Package holidays.
Britain's newsroom. Weekday mornings from 9:30.
Men's mental health. Men are starting to talk a lot more. You've been through a lot of stuff that people don't know about.
Yeah, I mean, the last few years for me have been very, very difficult. People see me on tour, performing, making music, but myself and my wife, we went through 2 miscarriages. For us, that was a very devastating time and very difficult to know how to kind of process those emotions. And I guess as a man, I did the thing of bottling up my emotions, and where I feel comfortable to be able to express myself is in the studio, whereas, she had obviously a different reaction to, what happened to us, because not only was it happening to her mentally, psychologically, but it was happening to her physically as well. And I think something that she really wanted to see from me was that sensitivity and that emotion. And I thought that as a man, being strong was trying to bottle up my emotions and just show her that, that I'm being strong for her. But actually being strong is talking about it. And what's happened ever since I've started to talk about it is I've spoken to more men that have experienced baby loss. My wife forced out of me, how do you feel? And I ended up as a mess on the floor. I was exasperating, crying, almost inconsolable. She was just holding me in her arms as we cried together, and we cried together. And I didn't realise I needed that release so badly. Like I said, I've been able to speak to other men, and we've been able to cry together, and they shared their own experiences, which they did similar to me. But actually, as men, I feel like that conversation and that sensitivity and being able to be emotional together.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 10 to 3. Now, have you started to make summer holiday plans? I've just asked for some time off in June. Emily's
Have
going
you now?
away.
That's news to me.
Emily, I told you earlier. You're going away next week, so it's all symbiotic.
Just for a few days. Just for a few days. Yeah.
But lots of people are thinking about what they're doing this summer now, and you might need to be wary. Scammers are reportedly fleecing holidaymakers of hundreds of pounds with fake flights that never take off, or by booking holiday homes that simply don't exist.
Uh-oh. Well, these fraudsters are using social media as well as booking websites to target their prey. According to data from Lloyds Bank, the victims of these holiday scams are losing an average of £765.
An average?
Gosh.
Wow.
Well, joining us now to discuss this is travel and aviation expert Sally Gethin. Sally, not to make this about me, but I'm going to make this about me. I've got a package holiday booked, and it's all supposed to be super-duper good value. Could it be that my flights aren't actually booked and they don't take off?
I mean, did you check that your provider is ATOL protected? Because that's one shortcut way to make sure you are protected in the worst case scenario. Say the company goes bust, for example.
Sally, I'm not sure I did. But I'm gonna hope it's all legit. But Sally, so this is what
You've got homework now after
this is what people need to look out for: ATOL protection.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the stamps, you know, the badges of authenticity you can look for, and also whether it's ABTA protected as well, which is the British Travel Agents Association. And those two mean that, you know, any company operating with those is fully accredited. And if you need more information, you can go to, you know, just Google ATOL, ATOL, or ABTA, ABTA. .org. But there are other ways to really protect yourself. And what's worrying about this latest survey and the results is that scammers are really going after the 35 to 44-year-old age group. These are people often with families that are traveling on a budget hit by the cost of living. And so they're going out of the box, out of these accredited sites maybe, to find a good deal, perhaps on social media, for example, or third-party websites. And that's where you've got to be super careful if you think you're getting a great deal and actually you're just throwing your money down the drain.
Yes, always double-check that website that you're buying from if you are on a website. But, I mean, I'm looking at this average amount lost, £750. That seems like an astonishing amount of money to lose for an average.
Yeah, it's actually 765 quid per victim. So, yeah, that really is a huge amount. But you and I and everybody knows that even if you lose 30 quid or 50 quid, it stings, it hurts, doesn't it? It's the thing about being scammed and only realising afterwards. And, you know, one of the ways these scammers do it is they might use a legit site to start off with and maybe use your credit card to make some payment up front, a deposit, for example. But then they try and lure you away and get you to make a bank transfer and top up payment. No, don't do that. And especially also when your bank sends verification queries via a legitimate means of contacting you, you need to heed those alerts as well. So you've got to be a little bit old school about the way you go about protecting yourself.
Well, thank you very much indeed for joining us, Sally Gethin, aviation and travel expert.
Yeah,
well, there you go.
Really good advice.
Be careful.
There. That, Emily, you probably should have taken before you booked your flights.
All right, smarty pants, you know. With hindsight is a great thing, isn't it?
To be fair, I still need to book my flights for June, so I'm going to follow this advice precisely. But up next, it's Martin Daubney. And what have you got on your programme, Martin?
Hello, guys. Well, as we found out that there's £4 billion a year being spent on housing homeless asylum seekers, a 239% boom, I'm asking, why should British taxpayers pick up the bill? If they've been granted the right to remain, they could always get a job. If they need to be deported, they should be gone anyway. Plus chaos in the European Union as they reject the migration pact. Poland and Hungary first, others are sure to follow. Plus, a clever Trevor started a global support network of Trevors. We've got him on the show. And Jan Leeming says she's too posh for the telly. But we've got the legend on my show later on. But before all of that, it's time for your latest weather forecast.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. Staying mild for the UK through the rest of the day and into Friday too, but we will see some rain moving into the northwest. This weather front that's been affecting southern areas has created a few wiggles and waves on it, and this wave will push up into northwestern areas through this evening. So Northern Ireland are likely to see some heavy bursts of rain through the next few hours before that moves away into western areas of Scotland, northwestern England, Cumbria in particular, like to see some heavier rain this evening. Further south, though, it should remain dry away from the coast and over the hills, but it will be a particularly cloudy night. However, it will be another mild start on Friday, temperatures not much below double digits wherever you are. The best of the sunshine first thing will be restricted to the far northeast of Scotland. Further south across Scotland, it will be quite cloudy and wet through much of the day, also across parts of Northern Ireland, this area of northwest England as well. Further south, though, for much of central southern England and Wales, the cloud will break up and there'll be some sunshine by the end of the afternoon. It will be a little hazy, but it's strong enough to pick temperatures up, put into the high teens, possibly the low 20s by Friday afternoon. Now that area of rain sinks further south into parts of North Wales, more widely across northern England through Saturday, and behind it we see some unsettled weather with showery outbreaks of rain. That's also going to introduce cooler air to more northern areas for Sunday, so more unsettled and cooler end to the weekend, but across the south it should remain dry.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.